Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I want to declare that we have a quorum. And I'd like to, I'm John Clausen. I'm the chairman of the Committee of Adjustments today. And that we have Bernie Law is one of the members. Bernie, would you please raise your hand? And Sandra Marsh is another member. Would you please raise your hand? Okay. This is an electronic hearing of the Committee of Adjustments for the town of Pelham. Everyone present and viewing at home will be given an opportunity to comment on the applications being heard. Now, I want all comments and questions addressed through the chair, please. This meeting, public meeting, has been called to satisfy the requirements of Planning Act and council bylaws. Notice of this meeting has been given by prepaid first-class mail to all persons listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 60 meters, 200 feet of the subject properties. In addition, a public notice sign has been posted on all the lands, and information has been provided on the town's Committee of Adjustments webpage. Agencies commenting on applications may request that certain conditions be imposed should the application be approved of. That's very important there. And if you have any objections to any of the conditions, please voice them, and it will not adversely affect our decision, the committee's decision. And the process of the application and relative correspondence will be heard. Holly will read that out, following which the applicant will be given the opportunity to address the application and make a presentation. Any person concerned with the application will then be given an opportunity to participate in the meeting. And if you pre-registered to speak during the public portion of the application, you will be brought into the Zoom meeting and will be unmuted. I'd ask that you please state your name and mailing address for the record, and that please, once you finish speaking, you will be removed from the Zoom meeting room. If you are live streaming at home and wish to submit a comment during application, you may do so by emailing clerks@pelham.ca. I'll repeat, clerks@pelham.ca. At the conclusion of the public portion of the meeting, these comments will be read into the records. If you submit comments after the public portion has been closed, your comments will not be considered. At the conclusion of the discussion, the committee will render a decision and advise of any applicable conditions. Specific wording for conditions will be determined by the committee following the public portion of this hearing. Copies of the decision will be mailed to the applicant or agent and to any other person that files a written request. If you wish to be provided a copy of the decision, please contact the Secretary Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. The Secretary Treasurer's contact information is available on the upcoming PowerPoint presentation and available on the town's website. Any person, corporation, or public body has a right to appeal either the decision itself or conditions of consent to the local appeal body within 20 days of the decision, and within 20 days of the mailing of the decision for consent. Okay, additional information. The meeting is being conducted by, as you can see, the Zoom webinar, and is also being live streamed on the town's YouTube channel. You may wish to put your view on gallery view by clicking the top right corner from speaker view. We ask that you're mindful of the background noise for the duration of the meeting, so that could interfere with ours. Committee members are asked to mute their microphones until you're asked to speak. Please raise your hand if you would like to speak and vote by raising your hand. Please note that attendees who have registered will remain in the waiting room via telephone or electronically until the application of interest is brought to the committee. Those participating online via Zoom will be asked by the chair to raise their virtual hand when they wish to speak. So if I see your hand, then I'll let you speak. On the computer, you can do so by clicking on participants in the bottom center of the screen and then clicking by raise hand. On a mobile device, you can tap raise hand in the bottom left corner. So Holly, if I miss something, just please let me know. You will then be called upon to speak and your microphone will be unmuted by staff. And if you're participating by phone, you'll also be unmuted by staff when the agenda item that you've registered for is being issued. Applicants, agents, and attendees are advised that they are free to leave the webinar once a decision has been made under application. So I've introduced the panel, and I also asked the panel, all three of it, Bernie, do you have any pecuniary interest in today's?
No, sir, I do not.
Sandra, do you have any?
I have none.
And I, the chair, I have none. Holly, have there been any requests for withdrawal or adjournment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there is not.
Okay, then I guess we start with the application, and we'll start with the
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would be beginning with B7, following into reading B8, being heard concurrently. Committee of Adjustment hearing, Tuesday, October 6th, 2020. All Town of Pelham in-person Committee of Adjustment hearings have been canceled. Instead, the town is holding all Committee of Adjustment hearings electronically via Zoom. Please note, no decisions have been made prior to this public meeting. This presentation is based upon the Town of Pelham's Planning Department report and analysis. All comments received from commenting agencies and the public have been forwarded in full to the Committee of Adjustment members for their consideration. Participants are reminded, ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you will be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you will be removed from the meeting. Participant microphones and video cameras will remain off until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by the committee, your microphone will be muted. Once voting on an item has taken place, participants will be removed from the meeting completely. You will resume viewing the meeting via live stream. Decorum. The Committee of Adjustment is a formal public hearing requiring decorum, meaning all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you will be given an opportunity to address the committee at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note, comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting, otherwise they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will not be tolerated. Cheering, booing, or hissing from the gallery will not be tolerated. Please note, if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. 1150 Line Avenue applications. Please note the Committee of Adjustment's role in these Planning Act applications is to determine if the subject lands should be granted a severance or not, and if the potential new lot and remnant should be granted associated minor variances. All other Planning Act applications, such as zoning, bylaw amendments, plan of subdivision, condominium, etc., would trigger another planning meeting. The Committee of Adjustment is not the approval authority for determining if the lands will be used for townhouses, etc. Council is the approval authority for all other Planning Act applications for the Town of Pelham. Application for consent file B7/2020P, 1150 Line Avenue, Part 1. The subject parcel, shown as Part 1 on the attached sketch, is located on the west side of Line Avenue, lying north of Bacon Lane in the Town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 533.81 meters square of land, Part 1, for a single detached residential lot. 4,067 meters square of land, Part 3, is proposed to be retained for future private lane townhouse development. The use of the townhouse is not currently permitted and would need to contemplated via a zoning bylaw amendment requiring a statutory public meeting and council approval. Note, this application is being considered concurrently with consent file B8 2020P and minor variance files A25 2020P and A26 2020P. Hydro 1, no concerns. Bell Canada, no concerns. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, see conditions. Summarized public comments and planning staff responses. Lack of information and details about future proposed use of townhouse on Part 3. Example, number of units, size, and height. Response. The developer has not applied for a zoning bylaw amendment, site plan approval, draft plan of condominium, or subdivision approval to permit townhouses. This severance application, along with the concurrent minor variance applications, are not the medium to contemplate the suggested future use of the remnant lands, which are outside the scope of the Committee of Adjustment. Where will the private road be located on Part 3? Response. See comments number 1. There is no formal development plan provided for Part 3. This should be a plan of subdivision application when building 10 plus townhouses and 2 detached houses. Response. There are not 10 townhouses being proposed. At this time, there is only 2 concurrent severance applications being heard. No formal application for townhouses has been received to date, and if they were received, we will be dealing with them separately. See comments number 1. Policy D5.1 of the Pelham Official Plan states that plans of subdivision shall generally be deemed necessary if establishing a new public road or the development is not considered to be infill or a subdivision plan is required to ensure that the entire land holding is developed in an orderly and efficient manner or 3 or more lots are being created. The proposed application is premature without full details on Part 3. Response. The redevelopment of Part 3, remnant lands, is a separate process under the Planning Act which will be dealt with via Council. In terms of Part 3, the Committee of Adjustment's focus is limited more towards ensuring there is appropriate street frontage and area of land available to support some form of efficient future development. It is the planning staff's opinion that the retained parcel, Part 3, is adequately sized and configured given its context to support future development in some capacity. However, there is no position taken with respect to the type or number of units that may be developed in the future. Proposed development is incompatible with surrounding neighborhood. Response. The proposed single detached residential land use is compatible because the land use is literally identical to the surrounding neighborhood. Furthermore, the reduced lot size is marginal and will continue to provide rear yard amenity space, landscaped open space for stormwater management, ample off-street parking, and enhance the public realm through appropriate built form at the landscape, subject to conditions. Neighboring property values will decrease. Response. There is no evidence to support this claim. Typically, when landowners reinvest in their property, such as through residential redevelopment, adjacent properties tend to experience an increased valuation based on market comparables and economic forces. Proposed frontages are not consistent with the neighborhood. Response. A lot frontage is appropriate for the proposed development that would support a single residential and would not create any adverse neighborhood impacts on its own merits. Why was no environmental impact study, EIS, conducted before removing trees on the subject lands? Response. The trees on the subject lands are not designated significant woodland, therefore an EIS is not required. Were permits granted to remove the trees on the subject lands? Response. In the absence of a municipal tree cutting bylaw, permits are not required to remove trees on private property. Concerned about flooding, particularly on Stefflar Street, where will stormwater go? Response. A grading and drainage plan is required as a condition of severance approval. Therefore, at building permit, there is also a detailed grading plan required for approval. Any future development on Part 3 will also require a detailed lot grading and drainage plan. Concerns about the impacts to groundwater. The town official plan requires a hydrological assessment and an EIS to be conducted to determine if the proposed development will negatively impact natural heritage features or ecological functions. Response. Most of Fawn Hill is designated as a highly vulnerable aquifer according to Schedule B1 of the official plan. Policy C5.2 of the official plan states that in an effort to protect, improve, or restore the quality and quantity of rural residents' drinking water, major applications for site alteration or redevelopment outside of Fawn Hill and Fenwick may need to be supported by a hydrogeological or hydrological report. Policy C5.3, vulnerable groundwater areas, states that vulnerable groundwater areas in the town which are susceptible to risk of contamination or adverse impacts due to hydrological and hydroecological dynamics have been identified by the NPCA and are shown on Schedule B1 to this official plan. Where development and or site alterations require a planning approval, the town, in consultation with the region and the NPCA, may require the undertaking of a technical study to assess the risks of negative impacts on the aquifer. The scope of such a study will be determined through pre-consultation with the town, the region, and NPCA, and recommendations from such a study that are related to design or land use will be implemented through the zoning or site plan control. The official plan actually prohibits a variety of land uses which could harm the vulnerable aquifer, including storage of hazardous materials, organic soil conditioning sites, snow storage and disposal facilities, and storage of other contaminants, among other things. The NPCA and region did not have any concerns with respect to the highly vulnerable aquifer, nor did they require an EIS to be prepared. The region and town engineering staff did outline a number of requirements for storm water management. Therefore, pursuant to subsection 53.2, an EIS or hydrological assessment was not deemed to be required prescribed information. If both of the proposed lots are approved, Part 3 will be landlocked. Response. Part 3 will have 9.75 meters of frontage, which is not considered to be landlocked. This development will set a precedent. Response. Every Planning Act development application is considered independently on its own merits. If the committee approves these two lots, will that infer any forthcoming townhouse proposal for approval? Response. No. The approval of two single detached residential lots does not mean the third retained lot will receive approval for townhouse development. Any redevelopment of Part 3 will be considered separately, and a staff recommendation will be made to council where a decision will be made exclusive of this process. Why are the heights for the future houses not shown? Response. Any permitted dwelling simply needs to comply with the default building height requirements of the zoning bylaw. The applicant is not seeking an increased building height. The zoning bylaw has a 10.5 meter height limit, which applies broadly across all residential zones throughout the town of Pelham. Why would the town even consider these applications and not just reject them upon receipt? Response. Pursuant to Section 45 of the Planning Act, the town is statutorily obligated to process all applications it receives and hold a hearing within 30 days of receiving completed application. Planning staff is of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals dealing with appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of the existing urban land supply where suitable to do so. The severance will not compromise the remnant land's ability to adequately to accommodate future housing opportunities, should that be proposed, because it is of a sufficient size, geometry, and appropriate configuration. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. The remnant lands will continue as a single detached residential lot until such time as the landowner explores alternative development options. Again, it is noted that any future development on Part 3 besides one single detached dwelling will be subject to future Planning Act approvals, namely a zoning bylaw amendment and a site plan approval, both of which require council approval, and the zoning bylaw amendment will require a further public further public circulation in accordance with the Planning Act. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with provincial policy statements and conforms to the provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that application file B7/2020P be subject to the following conditions. That the applicant obtain zoning approval on Part 1, minimum lot frontage and minimum lot area. Conduct a stage 1 to 2 archaeological assessment prepared by a licensed archaeologist and receive clearance from the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture. At a minimum, the assessment must cover the building envelope of the proposed lot eligible for disturbance and be accepted by the Ministry prior to clearance of this condition. The licensed archaeologist may recommend further archaeological analysis or preservation steps be taken. No demolition, grading, or other soil disturbances shall take place on the subject land prior to the issuance of ministry letter confirming that all archaeological resource concerns have been mitigated and met licensing and resourcing conservation requirements. Provide front dwelling elevation plans that positively contribute to the public street through the use of a front porch, windows symmetrically proportioned to the building's mass, and a congruent use of exterior cladding, etc., to the satisfaction of the Director of the Community Planning and Development. Said elevation plans shall be substantially unaltered from those at the time of building permit. In consultation with the town's bylaw officer, install a 1.8 meter solid tall wood board fence along the north side lot line, but not extending into the front yard of Part 1, in compliance with the town's current fence bylaw to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. In consultation with the town's arborist, plant 3 large caliber deciduous street trees spaced equally along the frontages of parts 1 to 3 within the boulevard and selected from the town's approved street tree planting schedule to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Ensure all lots are serviced with, at a minimum, an individual 20 millimeter water service and 125 millimeter sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with the town standards. Installation of any services will require a temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Public Works Department. If existing services are proposed for reconnection, such services shall be inspected by the Public Works Department to determine their condition is satisfactory prior to connection. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with the works. Submit a drawing indicating the location of the individual water services and sanitary laterals for all lots, confirming no existing or proposed service branches from or through any parcel, proposed lot lines to other lands, and from or through the remnant lands to other lands. Locate cards are required after the installation of new services. Obtain approval for a driveway entrance and culvert permit as applicable, issued through the Public Works Department to town standards. The driveway entrance shall be located on the north side of the proposed lot. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan for all parcels demonstrating that drainage neither relies nor negatively impacts neighboring properties and that all drainage will be contained within the respective lots to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or designate. Submit a tree savings plan for Part 1 illustrating the anticipated building envelopes with a concerted effort to preserve as many trees as practical along the north lot line to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Existing trees that would be situated in the front and rear lot of the future dwellings are expected to be preserved in good, healthy state. This plan may be integrated with lot grading drainage plan. Sign the Town of Pelham Standard Memorandum of Understanding explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of parkland purposes are required prior to the issuing of building permit. Provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject lands of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of certificate of consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of the consent shall be borne by the applicant. If you wish to receive a copy of the Notice of Decision, please contact the Secretary Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. Nancy Bizzotto, Secretary Treasurer, Committee of Adjustment, 20 Pelham Town Square, P.O. Box 400, Font Hill, Ontario, LOS 1E0, and jbizzotto@pelham.ca. This contact information can also be found at the Town of Pelham's website. Through you, Mr. Chair, if you would just give us a moment to share our screen with the next B8 PowerPoint, we would appreciate that. And I'm just going to take a sip of water, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am now hydrated.
Oh, good.
Application for consent file B8/2020P 1150 Lane Avenue, Part 2. The subject parcel shown as Part 2 on the attached sketch is located on the west side of Lane Avenue, lying north of Bacon Lane in the town of Pelham. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and to convey 533.81 meters square of land, Part 2, for a single detached residential lot. 4,067 meters square of land, Part 3, is proposed to be retained for future private lane townhouse development. The use of the townhouse is not currently permitted and would need to be contemplated via zoning bylaw amendment requiring a statutory public meeting and council approval. Note, this application is being considered concurrently with consent file B7-2020P and minor variance files A25-2020P and A26-2020P. To date, the following comments have been received. Hydro 1, no concerns. Bell Canada, no concerns. Building Department, no comments. Public Works, see conditions. All public comments, as shown on the slideshow for B7/2020, have been considered for this application. You just heard me read those into the record just moments ago. Planning staff is of the opinion that the proposal applies current planning and development goals dealing with appropriate infill development, making more efficient use of existing urban land supply where suitable to do so. The severance will not compromise the remnant land's ability to accommodate future housing opportunities that should be proposed, because it is of a sufficient size, geometry, and appropriate configuration. The proposed severance should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regards to traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. The remnant lands will continue as a single detached residential lot until such time as the landowner explores alternative development options. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with provincial policy statement and conforms to provincial, regional, and local plans. Given this analysis, planning staff recommend that consent file B8/2020P be approved subject to the following conditions. Obtain zoning approval on Part 2 for minimum lot frontage and minimum lot area. Obtain zoning approval on Part 3 for minimum lot frontage. Conduct a Stage 1 to 2 archaeological assessment prepared by a licensed archaeologist and receive clearance from the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture. At a minimum, the assessment must cover the building's envelope of the proposed lot eligible for disturbance and be accepted by the Ministry prior to clearance of this condition. The licensed archaeologist may recommend further archaeological analysis or preservation steps taken. No demolition, grading, or other soil disturbances shall take place on the subject land prior to the issuance of ministry letter confirming that all archaeological resource concerns have been mitigated and met licensing and resourcing conservation requirements. Provide front dwelling elevation plans that positively contribute to the public street through the use of a front porch, windows symmetrically proportioned to the builder's mass, and a congruent use of exterior cladding, etc., to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Said elevation plans shall be substantially unaltered from those at the time of building permit. In consultation with the town's arborist, plant 3 large caliper trees equally spaced along the frontages of parts 1 to 3 within the boulevard and selected from the town's approved street tree planting schedule to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. Ensure all lots are serviced with at least a minimum 20 millimeter water service and 125 millimeter sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with the town standards. Installation of any service will require temporary works permit to be obtained and approved by the Public Works Department. If existing services are proposed for reconnection, such services shall be inspected by the Public Works Department to determine their condition is satisfactory prior to connection. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a drawing indicating the location of the individual water services and sanitary laterals for all lots, confirming no existing or proposed service branches from or through any proposed lot lines to other lands, and from or through the remnant parcel to other lands. Locate cards are required after the installation of new services. Obtain approval for a driveway entrance and culvert permit as applicable, issued through the Public Works Department to town standards. The driveway entrance shall be located on the north side of the proposed lot. The applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan for all parcels demonstrating that the drainage neither relies nor negatively impacts neighboring properties and that the drainage will be contained within the respective lots to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or designate. Sign the Town of Pelham's Memorandum of Understanding, explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of development for parkland purposes are required prior to the issuancing of building permit. Provide the Secretary-Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for the use in the issuance of certificate of consent. Provide the final certification fee of $395 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, to be submitted to the Secretary-Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions shall be borne by the applicant. If you wish to receive a copy of the Notice of Decision, please contact the Secretary-Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. Nancy Bizzato, Secretary-Treasurer, Committee of Adjustment, 20 Pelham Town Square, P.O. Box 400, Fonthill, Ontario, LOS 180, NJ Bizzato at pelham.ca. This contact information can also be found at the Town of Pelham's website. Through you, Mr. Chair, just give us one moment to stop sharing our screen and get ourselves situated. I do believe that we do have the applicant's agent and applicant's lawyer within the meeting now, so you may go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Holly. I will ask the applicant's agents if they have anything they'd like to say or any kind of, what do you call it? Let us see what you have in mind of that. And who would like to speak first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off. Good afternoon, committee, and thank you for allowing myself to speak. I'm a partner. My name is Patrick Maloney. I'm a partner with the law firm of Sullivan Manny. I do have Mr. Matt Kernahan, who is a registered professional land use planner with Upper Canada Consultants. Matt has been retained to provide objective land use planning evidence before this committee and give consultation advice to our client. I'm going to make my comments as it relates to both the consent and minor variance, just because otherwise I'll repeat myself a couple different times, and that won't be any good to you. So I will hand it over to Matt in a few moments, but I wanted to start out our presentation by stressing what applications are before this committee and what you need to determine compared to what is not before this committee. And I think Ms. Wilford properly set it out at the beginning of this meeting, that these applications are for the creation of 2 lots along Line Avenue for 2 single detached dwellings and minor variances associated with those 2 dwellings and those 2 lots. This is not about the development of part 3 on the sketch in any way. That is the larger remnant parcel, which is subject to a future development. But that application for future development is not before this committee. It is clear from most of the comments that the committee has received from the neighbors that they are in opposition, predominantly in opposition against the development of part 3. And not as there are comments with respect to the applications, but I think they're clouded by the comments as it relates to the development of part 3. In some way, the committee is advantaged by this in that they're insulated against that decision. That will come another day, and it will be before Town Council and not this committee. So at this point, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I will hand it over to Matt Kernahan, who can provide some of the planning policies and planning justification for these 4 applications.
Okay, Mr. Kernahan, I guess I ask that you proceed then with your presentation.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee, staff, and neighbors. Thank you very much, Patrick. As you mentioned, my name is Matt Kernahan. I'm with the firm Upper Canada Consultants. Our address is 30 Hanover Drive in St. Catharines, and we're located in Unit 3. I'm the agent representing Homes by Antonio, who's the owner of this property and the applicant in this instance. I've prepared a brief presentation which, like Patrick's, pertains to both the minor variance and the severance applications. So provided there are no issues technically, I'm going to proceed with that presentation if I can.
Please proceed.
So this slide just provides some context on the location of subject lands. As has been mentioned, they're on the west side of Line Avenue between Steffler Street and Bacon Lane. They're a very large property, and they currently contain a single detached dwelling. Subject property is near the boundary of Fonthill and East Fonthill. It's within an established neighborhood, and single detached dwellings are located on all sides of it. Staff has done a really good job of explaining what the applications pertain to, so I'm not going to go into any more detail here, other than to say that development plans for the remnant parcel, which is shown as Part 3, have not been finalized at this time. And as has been mentioned, they will be considered by council at a later date, and it's not up to the committee this evening to render a decision on those. What hasn't been mentioned yet is that an application for a minor variance has been submitted for each of the severed lots. The minor variances are requested for the proposed lot geometry, as is shown here. In particular, a minor variance is requested to permit 15.2 meters of frontage, whereas the current zoning requires 19. And for the proposed lot area of 533 square meters, whereas 700 square meters is required. The applications for minor variance also seek relief from the zoning regulations as they will apply to future dwellings. In particular, a minimum front yard setback of 6 meters is requested, whereas 7.7 is required by zoning. And a minor variance for interior side yard setback of 1.5 meters is requested, whereas 1.8 meters is required. And a maximum lot coverage of 55% is requested, whereas 30% is permitted. All of the requested variances will bring the zoning of the property in line with typical modern zoning requirements and will permit the construction of single detached dwellings on the lots in a fashion that is typical for new construction. The Planning Act is very specific on the consideration for approval of land division applications, including severances. This slide shows the list of considerations that should be had. In this instance, the planning report prepared by staff in support of the application has done a very good job at analyzing the proposal's conformity with the Planning Act, so I won't go into too much detail and repeat them other than to say a few summarizing things. In my view, the proposed severances will enable the efficient development of urban service land in a fashion that is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. There are no impediments to development on the lands, and the proposed severances will not frustrate the development of the larger remnant parcel. The severances are consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform to the regional and local town official plans. Similar to consent applications, the Planning Act is very specific about considerations for approval of minor variance applications. In particular, the Planning Act stipulates the following 4 tests. Does the variance meet the general intent and purpose of the official plan? Does the variance meet the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Is the variance desirable and appropriate development for use of the land, building, or structure? And is the variance minor in nature? The following few slides will provide some detail on how, in my view, the requested variances meet these tests. 1150 Line Avenue is designated urban living area built boundary in the town's official plan. The proposed infill lots for single detached dwellings are permitted and in fact encouraged by the official plan. The proposed density is approximately 18 units per hectare, which is well under the permissible 25 units per hectare. The proposed intensification of under 1% is far less than the official plan permits. And since the proposed lots are similar and will effectively integrate to the neighborhood without negative impacts on it, the proposal conforms to the official plan criteria for infill development and intensification. For these reasons, it's my opinion that the requested variances are consistent with the general intent of the official plan. The proposed variance related to lot frontage and area are consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaw, since the lots will be adequately sized for their intended single detached residential dwelling use, and they will effectively integrate within the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed variance for side yard setback is consistent with the general intent of the zoning bylaw, since the 1.5 meter industry standard setback provides adequate space for drainage and maintenance purposes, and the reduction will not impact privacy. The proposed variance for lot coverage is considered consistent with the official plan, as no drainage impacts are anticipated, and the houses will be appropriately scaled to the lots upon which they'll be developed. Lastly, the proposed reduced front yard is consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaw, as a legal parking space will still fit between the dwelling and the property line, and the setback will contribute positively to the streetscape in this area. The proposed variances are desirable and appropriate, as they will facilitate the efficient development of underutilized urban service land in a fashion that will enable the future development of the remnant parcel. The creation of 2 infill lots with the proposed zoning regulations is desirable and appropriate, as it will enable compatible development that will not result in significant negative impacts to surrounding properties. The proposed variances are considered minor in nature for the following reasons. The proposed lot geometry is in keeping with the historical pattern in the neighborhood, and the lots are similar to others in the area, which will effectively integrate the development into the neighborhood. The proposed lot geometry with the variances is still capable of accommodating dwellings, amenity area, and parking. And the proposed setbacks will not negatively impact on surrounding properties and will permit the efficient use of each property. Adequate space is available within setbacks for parking in the front and maintenance and drainage on the sides. Lastly, though not prescribed by the Planning Act as a test, the establishment of need and hardship is often required as part of a minor variance process. And in fact, the town's official plan indicates that applicants may be required to demonstrate these things during the approval of a minor variance. In this instance, the proposed variances for lot frontage are required to provide for the efficient development of the property as a whole. The reduced frontages are required to divide up the land in an efficient way, which will still leave adequate space to permit access and servicing connections to the remnant parcel for its future development. Reduced lot areas are a function of the depth of the proposed lots. The proposed depths, and by extension the areas, are required to provide adequate area on the remnant lot for its efficient development. The reduced front and side yard setbacks are required in order to provide consistency between the proposed development pattern and the surrounding neighborhood, and to contribute to a positive streetscape. Lastly, the application of the as of right 30% lot coverage, which is currently a requirement, represents a hardship in this instance, since it would prevent the development of dwellings of similar form to those in the surrounding neighborhood on these properties, and it would not permit the construction of houses in accordance with the permitted setbacks. The requested 55% lot coverage is appropriate, since it will permit development in accordance with setbacks. In closing, before I turn it back to Mr. Maloney, I would just like to summarize my submissions. The proposed consents meet the applicable criteria outlined in the Planning Act for granting consents and conform to the requirements of the official plan for intensification and infill development. All requested variances meet the applicable 4 tests of the Planning Act, and the variances are needed to permit the orderly and appropriate development of the subject property to effectively integrate the development into the neighborhood. Lastly, as stated in the report from planning staff, the proposed severances and the associated minor variances are consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform to applicable provincial, regional, and town planning policies, and in my opinion, represent good land use planning. It's my professional opinion that the application should be supported by the committee, and on behalf of my client and Homes by Antonio, I respectfully request that the applications be approved as they were applied for. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just close our comments, I will focus these comments on the consent application, and then I will
I
have
don't want anything more on the minor variance. Just stick with the
absolutely, yeah. So this committee has been giving a legislative function to make decisions based on good planning and the tests set out under the Planning Act, and being subsection 5124 of the Planning Act for consents. Your decision must also consider the provincial policy as well as the town's official plan. So with the report that you've received from the town's own planning staff in support of the two consent applications, as well as the objective evidence of Mr. Kernahan, the evidence, the expert evidence is that these consent applications should be supported. And that the committee, again, you will likely hear comments as it relates to the development of Part 3, and you've already heard how that really is not relevant. Now, the primary parties that are impacted by the consent proposal are those that live at 2 Steffler and 4 Steffler Street, because those addresses immediately abut Part 1 on the sketch. There are maybe others in the neighborhood that you hear tonight, or even have provided written submissions that abut Part 3. But really, I wanted to focus on the addresses at 2 and 4 Steffler, because they are the ones that are impacted by this development. And I wanted to refer to a number of conditions that have been required to be imposed or suggested to be imposed by planning staff that were intended to address any potential impact on those particular neighbors. We did discuss this at some lengths with the town planning staff because we recognize that there was this potential impact. So with respect to the consent applications, and more so as it relates to Part 1, there are a number of conditions that have been introduced that will address that, the potential impact. So the first thing is that there's an installation of a fence along that lot line as far as they can go pursuant to the town's bylaws that will provide that buffer. Now, I know the neighbors along 2 and 4 Steffler appreciate that the trees that are there. I know our client has had discussions with at least one of them. And so in the conditions, you'll see that there's a requirement for a tree savings plan for Part 1. So there's going to be a concerted effort as much as possible to try to preserve as many of the trees on that property as possible. But failing that, there is also a condition that requires the planting of 3 larger trees along the boulevard to replace some of the trees. I appreciate that that may not impact the 2 and 4 Steffler, but that's the likely the best that can be done. There's a replanting of some way. The other condition that is on the consent is that the driveway will be at the north end of Part 1, and that's done on purpose because that reduces the amount of living area on that side abutting 2 and 4 Steffler. There'll be a garage there where there's no living area. There is a condition attached to the minor variance, which I'll address perhaps in the comments as to the application, that further adds or further addresses that potential impact on those properties. So I will reserve my comments for that. We ask that the committee approve the applications for consent based on the applicable tests and the opinions that have been given to you from the town's own planning staff, as well as the consultant planner, Mr. Kernahan. And I'd ask that you approve the application subject to the conditions suggested by town planning staff. Subject to any further questions, Mr. Chair or members of the committee, those are our submissions as it relates to the consent application.
Okay. I'm sure all 3 of us have some questions, and I think one of the things that you admitted in your comments is that the people surrounding the area that have been given a package to comment on the 60 meter, I think they have to be heard, and if they have any good ideas, I think they have to be looked at and decide whether they should be incorporated or not. I think you should show a willingness to satisfy and listen to the people that are around the area.
Well, Mr. Chair, there's no unwillingness. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the comments as it relates to the development of Part 3 are not relevant to the decision you have to make. By all means, I'm the first one to say public participation is paramount.
I make the following. I visited the site in that, and I see all these trees cut down and everything else. And I read that these people have flooding problems, a number of issues. And now we've changed the environment, made a number of changes. And we create 2 new parcels, but the third parcel causes problems for them. And more flooding, more problems. Have you at all thought about what you would do if all of a sudden we create 2 lots and all of a sudden, because of the third lot, the way it happened, all of a sudden people get flooded out on the south end, on the west end, and how this will be handled?
Well, Mr. Chair, one of the conditions that has been attached to the approval of the consent for these 2 lots is overall lot grading and drainage plan that will address the drainage of surface water from these 2 lots. So that will be reviewed by the town staff, including the engineering department, to make sure it's sufficient. So if anything, and then the development or future development of Part 3 will also have some sort of lot grading and drainage plan, obviously more sophisticated than what would be required for 2 individual lots, that would also address these situations. So at the end of the day, there will be an improvement of the drainage of surface water through the development of, again, I want to focus on Part 1 and Part 2 because that's what it's before this committee. But you even referenced Part 3, which is not before this committee, but that will be addressed as well through the future applications for development on that land. So if anything, development of this lot will improve that type of situation.
Well, having to make a decision, I don't want to be part of making a decision where we grant one thing and create a huge problem on the other hand. So to say that we can't look at parcel 3, fine, I'll go from a legalistic as to whether what is to be done with it. But I think we have to look at it from a engineering point of view, that if we grant these 2 and all of a sudden there is flooding in that, maybe there should be engineering and all the grading plan and figure out what you're going to do with the water before you get going, because I've read these, and these people have some very serious concerns. I'm sure that when we open it up to the public, we're going to hear this loud and clear. And I want to know that you have some kind of a plan to satisfy these people. That's my major concern.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, that's why the condition is placed on the consent approval. So the consent cannot be realized until that drainage is addressed for Part 1 and Part 2, and everything will flow away from Part 3 because there's issues with pre-development flows and post-development flows that you would know that as an engineer. So that issue would be addressed, and actually, like I said, would improve the situation for the lots.
Then I'd like to make this comment, and I'm talking because I know that I have these people listening. I want them to know that what we're looking at is that when you do your engineering for the lot before you get your consents and everything finalized, that they do not have to fear that water will be coming onto their yards, that they're going to have flooding problems or anything like that, that the engineering principles will be dealt with so that we don't create a problem in the future for them. I just need them to have that, shall we say, that they feel good about the development, knowing that they're not going to have that kind of a problem because of it, if you understand what I'm saying.
That's fair.
Okay. I've said enough. Bernie, have you got any questions? Or Sandra, have you got any questions? I'll start with Sandra. Go ahead. Yeah, okay.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions about the conditions that are suggested for Part 1. The first is the 6-foot tall fence that's going to be constructed along the north lot line. What is the timeline for that? Is that prior to construction or once construction is complete? And the second point of clarification is the planting of the 3 large trees. Are all the 3 trees on Part 1, or is it 1 tree on part 1, one on part 2, and one on part 3 somewhere.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to answer the committee member's question. So with respect to the fence, it's a condition of consent that we install that fence along the north side of the north side of the lot line. And that has to be to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. So that means that would have to be installed before we create the lot. So what that means, we only, from the date of decision, we have 1 year, or date of affirmation of the decision, you have 1 year in order to satisfy the conditions of consent. So, and it's a legislative 1 year, so you can't go any more than that. You can't get an extension. So that fence would have to be installed immediately. As it relates to the, if that answers your question, by all means, you can do a follow-up. With respect to the trees, they're supposed to be on the town's boulevard in front of parts 1 through 3. And I think there is some flexibility with the town as to where they would be planted, but it would be along the frontages of part 1 through 3. Mr. Kernahan did raise an issue that the frontage of part 3 is intended to be an entranceway to the future development. So it wouldn't make sense to park a tree right, or plant a tree right in front of that. So there may be some leniency on that regard. But no, as the condition reads, it's on the boulevards in front of part 1, 2, and 3 with some flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, Mr. Maloney, you raise a good point. I want the people to understand that no consent will be given until the conditions that have been read are met. I think that we should be clear that they understand this, and I appreciate that you've started to make this clear. So I need them to understand it. Okay, Mr. Law, you go ahead then.
Thank you, John. Through the chair, with respect to the 6-foot fence and the trees, from the aerial view pictures we see now, there's a lot of green trees planted on the north side of that property line. And it would appear to me that those trees will be cut down. 3 of those homes have pools in their backyards. You're going to have 1.6 meters from the property line of the building to the fence line, 1.6 meters. There will quite likely be a sidewalk going down along from the front of the yard to the rear of the yard, which doesn't leave any room to plant trees along the north side of those homes. So my question is, how will you replace those trees on the north side of that property line that will be on those homes that back on from Stefflar?
Through
Are
you,
you
Mr.
talking,
Chair.
Bernie, the two? Are you talking the two, the 2 lots where the trees are right now, Bernie?
Well, the first lot that's beside the homes coming off Stefflar, the first homes. And in the pictures, there's lovely trees all along there. But all I can see is lots of green foliage when I drove over to view the property.
Can I ask the question a different way for you, Bernie?
Pardon?
Do those trees have to be removed to install the fence? And what is the quality of fence? Is it going to be a cedar fence or is it going to be a chain lock fence? I think we should also, the 2 owners of the property, I'm sure they don't want to see a chain link fence if it's going to be, and there should be some stipulation as to what kind of fence. And also, I'll ask again with the trees, how are these existing trees being handled?
Through Mr. Chair, to answer Mr. Law's question and yours as well. So with respect to the fence, the conditions read a woodboard fence, a solid woodboard fence along the property line. So no chain link fence or anything like that. A solid woodboard fence.
Well, is it going to be pressure treated wood, cedar wood? Is it going to conform to the neighbor's landscaping, or is it going to be a sore spot? I want that clarified too.
Yeah.
Or you talk to your neighbor and make sure that they're happy. Okay, I
suppose
stop and I'll let you talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suppose the devil's in the details, but it would be consistent with the bylaw that the municipality has passed as well. There is a specific stipulation as to the type. I'm not sure you can get in much more detail than that. But to answer Mr. Law's question with respect to the trees, you'll see also that there is a condition that we submit a tree savings plan for part 1. I granted some of the trees, and our client did have some discussions, I know, with one of the owners, at least one of the owners, about how best to do this. But the tree savings plan would make an effort to preserve as many of the trees as possible. Obviously, as Mr. Law indicated, some of the trees immediately abutting the building will have to be removed, and there's no sense in trying to save a tree that will end up dying. But there is also a large area to the front where the trees will not be impacted by the building of the home, as well as in the rear. There is likely a large area of trees that can be preserved. And the point of what I'm saying is that there's a condition in this, again, approval that has to be satisfied within the 1 year, that there is a tree savings plan that would make a concerted effort to preserve as many trees as possible. And I can tell you from my client's perspective, that is his intention.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Bernie.
John, through the chair, I know we have a big issue with water in all of Font Hill from rain, storms. My concern is that there's not enough land left. Once you use 55% of the property mass to take into the building, there's not enough land left for the water coming down to be able to filter down through the soil. So the rainwater coming off of the roof, 55% of this building water is going to come down eavesdrops and is going to run on all 4 sides of this home. People going to the north, 3 houses have got swimming pools in their backyard. And this water is going to come down the roof. It's going to go on this 1.6 meters, which also is going to have a sidewalk. And the waters are going to go right straight over to the neighbors' yards. And I'm afraid that it's going to run into the pool. A wooden fence is not going to stop the water from running away from their new home over to the existing homes on Stefflar.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's similar to what I mentioned earlier. There's the lot grading and drainage plan, which is a requirement of that plan that none of the water can go onto the adjacent properties, at least nothing more than what was pre-development flows. So all that water will be directed towards the street, and assuming it's done correctly by an engineer and approved by the municipality, that all that water will flow away from those. There's the 2 properties, there's 2 pools. We don't really front on, or the part 1 doesn't really front on to 6 Stefflar. So I agree with your concern, but that's why there's a condition in here to have a lot grading and drainage plan to make sure to avoid that from happening.
Okay, Bernie, I'll add a little to that. If the engineers in their studies find that they have to dig a pond on part 3 to get rid of the water on parts 1 and 2, and to get rid of the problem of drainage, then that's what's going to have to be done. So there are options from an engineering point to make sure there's no flooding. It could even be, it could be far-fetched, but say they can't get rid of the water, so that they can't grant the consent after if we've given it or whatever, because they can't get the engineering to work to keep the from flooding, especially 100 or 500-year storm. So all I'm saying is, for Mr. Maloney, there is a protection for the owners on that, based the fact that an engineer has to design it, and we won't know what will happen until that's been seen. Mr. Maloney, if you want to care to comment, if you disagree or agree with that.
No, I think there's a condition in place that protects that from a negative impact on an adjacent property by through the requirement of the lot grading plan.
Okay, Bernie, go ahead.
Okay, through the chair, once again, we have issues here in Font Hill with water going down driveways onto the street. Some streets have storm sewers, which can take the water away. This street does not. With all this water coming off of these buildings onto Lyon Avenue without proper storm drainage sewers, we're going to have flooding on the streets. We have flooding on all kinds of our streets in Pelham right now. Station Street as an example, where we're spending millions to fix it, and all over our town. So I want to be concerned that the soil that we have on your lot can absorb a good portion of this water. By putting the building at 55% of the lot size, once again, 30% is what we qualify for. And I'm afraid that we don't have enough space in arable soil to absorb the water.
Well, Bernie, I think we've discussed this enough. We have Mr. Marr present, and okay. Mr. Marr adds the dimension to the fact that he's the public works, and he can assure people that no problems will arise, because he, as a professional, he will be examining whatever design is made in consultation with whoever does the engineering. And you have to understand that he is quite competent and quite capable. And let me tell you, when he proves something, it's going to work. I think we can put this whole thing to bed now. Unless Mr. Marr has wants to make an additional comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'll stand behind that comment. Our engineering staff will be reviewing a lot grading drainage plan to make sure that the drainage from these parcels are not impacting neighboring properties. We have various types of drainage systems within the town of Pelham. Some streets have storm sewers. Some streets have roadside ditching. Some have a combination of both. So when we have the log drainage and grading plan submitted, engineering staff will review and make comments based on those plans and ensure that there's positive drainage towards the storm sewer system.
I thank you, Mr. Marr. Any other questions that we have? I have a question for Mr. Thompson. When is a property landlocked? The road that we're creating, or the entrance, I noticed from the drawings from the planner, isn't the 9.7 or 32 feet all the way. It narrows, and then it narrows in that. So it may be 32 feet coming in, but it's going to be less than that going in. And what size and does it have to be, or the width to be maintained so that the property in the back is not landlocked? Could you please answer that question for me?
Certainly, through the chair. I'm not sure what you mean by it getting narrower. The frontage is 9.7 meters on part 3, which is continuing, and then it's getting larger.
When Mr. Kernahan showed his drawing in the two parcels, and he showed the road, the property as it exists is not a perfect rectangle. One side's longer than the other. So when you put the part 1 and 2 parallel to the north line, and the way it works, you have 32 feet frontage, but at the back of part 2, the road narrows. If his drawings if Mr. Kernan wants to show that slide, then we can look at it. I want to make sure that there's enough width for an entrance to be sure. We talk 32 at the front, but what is it between part 2 and the boundary line? If it's 25, if it's 25 feet, is that acceptable? That's how I want to make sure of that. You understand what I'm saying?
Through the chair, not entirely. I mean, okay, just to answer your original question, by definition, a parcel is landlocked when it does not have frontage onto a public street that's been improved. And by improved, that just means it's been paved as a road. So in this case, literally any amount of frontage on part 3 would constitute a parcel not being landlocked. And part 3, like we don't have a proposal, there is no proposal that's being contemplated for any private road development at this point in time. But generally speaking, private lane developments only require a frontage, like the laneway themselves are usually 6 meters wide. So typically a frontage like 7 meters or above or 8 meters or above is usually adequate. So there's a comfortable buffer here at 9.75 meters.
Okay,
It
so
meets the definition of the zoning bylaw for not being landlocked.
so this access, there's no restriction as to the width of the access, correct? So we're not creating any problem that way then.
Through the chair, no.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Sandra, please.
Just to expand on that, I guess this question is also for Curtis. If the 2 consent applications are granted, are we not then creating part 3 where it will be a third parcel with deficient frontage? Is that not correct? Is there a reason why part 3 is not, because we're creating a parcel with deficient frontage, would that not be required to have a minor variance at this severance, if this severance is granted?
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, you would be conditionally approving 3 parcels. Well, you're conditionally approving part 3, which does have a deficient frontage. One of the conditions is that the frontage get rectified through a zoning application. The applicant could have done that today. They didn't have to. Similarly, part 1 and part 2 actually did not need to be contemplated today. If part 1 and 2, those 2 variance applications weren't in, you would have seen modified conditions for these 2 consent applications, which would have required the frontages and the lot areas to be sorted out. We still have those conditions worded. Should the variances not get approved today, they would have 1 year to sort that out, whether it be through an amended minor variance application or through a zoning bylaw amendment application. Either of those can address it for parts 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, thank you.
Curtis, just through you, we're not dealing with part 3 here today. I just, for the people, let them know that if they have any concerns for part 3, not only do we not address it today, but they can address it when the applicant applies for, if he applies for zoning or whatever, they can go to the town hall and talk to the politicians and make their voices known there. I just don't want it to be made today because we're not dealing with that. You understand? So could you just explain to them their rights based on if they go for a rezoning? So that we don't deal with it today.
Through the chair. Yeah, so basically what's up for debate today is the lot geometry and the size and the configuration of all of the parcels. In the event of a future development application, whenever that may be for part 3, for anything other than 1 single detached house, which is currently permitted, would warrant a zoning bylaw amendment application, which is a statutory public process under the Planning Act. So similarly, just forecasting here, we'd receive a zoning amendment application for part 3. They'd have to put the sign up on the property when we got to the point of a public meeting, and the neighbors within 120 meters, so it's a larger catchment area on the public notice, would be notified directly by mail. So yeah, and then there would be a similar process like we're having today, albeit with council instead. Okay.
Now the other thing, I noticed you addressed it, Curtis, in your minutes, that you need a subdivision plan if you create 3 lots. Now, we are creating 3 lots, or are we not? We're creating through severance 2 lots, or are we creating 3 lots? I'm anticipating this question. I just want to get this thing ironed out right now. Would you kindly explain the rationale of what you stated, why they don't need a subdivision plan.
To the chair. So the official plan outlines, I'm just trying to find it here, but there's, I think there's 3 or 4 subsections in that policy which outline generally when a subdivision shall be required. It's important to note that the language is prefaced with generally. That being said, the one that specifically cites about the number of lots as a trigger, it reads that when 3 or more new lots are being created, a subdivision plan shall generally be warranted. In this case, there is 1 lot. They're by definition only creating 2 lots. If there was a part 4 on here, then that would be 3 or more. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just want that to be clear, because when I first, I can understand that will be part, and I will just refer to your answer so that we don't get into a long discussion on it. Have you got any more questions from our members of the committee members? Sandra, Bernie?
No, I have none.
Okay, so Holly, I guess, do I ask whether we have any emails, or does that come a little later?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that comes after we have heard from all the pre-registered members of the public. And just bear with us, we will bring in the first pre-registered member of the public, and that would be Peter Scott. So we will just be bringing him in from the waiting room. So just give us 1 moment.
And Holly, I'm not disappearing. I'm just taking a quick break. I'll be right back.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have a quick 1-minute recess while we bring in Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, you should be receiving a notification from us asking you to unmute yourself. There should be a little microphone at the bottom of your screen. There you are. We can see you, Mr. Scott. I would just ask that you hold on to your comments until the chair does return.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you for your patience. We have Mr. Scott there?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chair, and we're ready whenever you are.
I'm ready. Okay, Mr. Scott, I gather you have a few questions. I read your comments in that, and
yeah, that's probably the understatement of the year.
Okay,
well,
you've heard me get a number of questions answered. I tried to get the applicant, and you had our engineer, the town engineer. I think that there's certain things that we have explained quite satisfactory as far as I could. I don't want to dwell too much on this. I would suggest that you keep your scope of comments to anything new to add or anything that we've overlooked. So I let you proceed. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So first, I just want to thank everybody. I must thank the town of Pelham staff for the comprehensive and detailed package related to the development of 1150 Line Avenue. Obviously, a considerable amount of time and effort went in on our behalf, and the research necessary was comprehensive. specifically Curtis Thompson for his detailed responses and recommendations. I talked to him today and he was very helpful. I want to thank Nancy and Holly for keeping the channels of communication open. And I think everybody's been very understanding of the situation that we're in. I really felt that we were going to get railroaded into this development, but the questions that were asked by the committee were very helpful and very much appreciated. I also want to acknowledge that the neighbours, this development is probably going to impact our house more than anyone's in a neighbourhood because it's adjacent to our property. So I want to thank the neighbours. There was 14 neighbours, all 14 homes that surround this property, all signed a petition in opposition to the development being done. So I'd like to thank them for that support. I do have speaking notes on part 3, but I'll pass over those, and I'm sure the rest of the neighbours will probably want to talk about that. So what I'd like to do is just maybe talk a little bit about some of my objections. There was a lot more detail in the letter, but you've obviously read it, and hopefully you've got page 61 of the document where the 2 photographs are. Does everybody have that? Page 61, there's 2 photographs. Okay, I'll assume that you can find them, so I'll just keep going. So I speak in opposition of the 4 applications before the Adjustment Committee because, in my opinion, they're not minor, nor do they fit in with the characteristic of the neighbourhood, and they're incomplete. The word used in the presentation earlier was identical existing homes. I know a few identical twins, and if one's 30% smaller, he or she is not identical. These lots are 30% smaller than ours. The applicant is requesting relief from the city approved zoning bylaws, which determines the lot size and the footprint of the houses to be constructed. The relief is being requested in not 1, but in 5 specific areas: minimum lot size, minimum lot frontage, maximum lot coverage, minimum front yard, and minimum interior side yard. It should be noted.
I'd like to just stick with the consent. I don't want to get involved into the minor variance right now. Let's just stick with the fact that the consent to severance. If you oppose that, let's explain reasons for that. Once we've got that ironed out and we work that out, then we can go to the next section.
Okay. Major in the application, it talks about privacy, and I believe it said will not affect privacy. That was in the presentation. So a major concern for us is the privacy. If the application is approved, it will result in the removal of a row of mature trees at least 30 feet tall, and a house will be constructed only 5 feet from our property line. Our backyard is currently very private. I tried to illustrate that the impact in our backyard on page 61 of the report. The first photograph is of the tree-lined lot, and the second photograph is just a Photoshop of a house in the backyard. And you can see the major difference to our property. My privacy concerns are, like I said, they're you can see from the photograph. The report suggests the relief is being requested to accommodate the construction of a 1-story home, but this unfortunately is not a condition of the approval. After talking to Curtis Thompson, I understand that we can't make that a condition that it be a 1-story home, but I do know that in the application it said the applicant was requesting these changes so that he could build a 1-story home. So I'd really like to hear from the lawyer or from the consultant if that is the intention to build a 1-story home. It's not clear to me, and I'm concerned that the approval gets done and then a 2-story house goes up and it'll become a problem for us.
Well, I'll ask Mr. Maloney. Let's ask that question now, Mr. Maloney. There was 2. There was also that I think Curtis was also talking with the windows or whatever, that you could have a blank wall facing his property or you know, some kind of glass. But what is the applicant's intent? Is he going to put single story? Has he thought about it, or does he want to put a 2-story? What does he want to do? And quite frankly, I could go to Curtis, say, is there anything we can do about it, or to alleviate Mr. Scott's concern about privacy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, just a couple different questions. With respect to the side of the building, I did speak with our client. It is his intention to construct a bungalow. In fact, he has already constructed a bungalow such as the one he is proposing for this already. Sent me a picture of it. Very attractive building. I can say to Mr. Scott, that is his intention. And the other thing that I was going to add to this, it's a condition as the minor variance, which is why I didn't address it in my comments. But there's a condition that the type of windows installed would be in a manner that would prevent overlook onto Mr. Scott's property. So the specific, I'm not going to read out the condition exactly, but we talked about with Mr. Thompson about trying to address this issue because we anticipated that Mr. Scott would have a problem with this. But the condition reads that we would have to provide in addition to the front elevations, the side yard elevation, that we're only going to have serrastory windows, which is like transom windows up top. We cannot have any regular windows where someone would be able to look over into Mr. Scott's yard. It does say, or other similar design or a similar type of window. And I did ask a question of Mr. Thompson today because one of the lots or one of the rooms on that side of the building will likely be the washroom, which the intention is an opaque window. So again, the intention behind those conditions were attached to the minor variance would prevent that overlook issue onto Mr. Scott's property. So I appreciate Mr. Scott with the pictures that he's provided. He does provide a 2-story building on there. And I would say, Mr. Scott, that you did provide a sort of caveat that you don't know exactly what's proposed there. So in fairness, that your question is valid, but it is intended to be a bungalow style building, which he has a specific design in mind. And also to further prevent overlook issues, there will be a condition attached that will limit the type of windows that would, and the intention behind that is to prevent overlook as well. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Chair.
I would also like to say to Mr. Scott, if we can control the windows and control what's going on that side, I would also negate the problem as if all of a sudden you get a 2-story right next to you. Okay, so I'm trying to provide as much protection for your privacy as we can, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key point here is honesty and transparency and what's going to happen. Obviously, I prefer that a house doesn't get built in my backyard, but if it is and it's a 1-story, that would definitely be helpful. If the windows, as described, are, I think they called them clear story windows, which are not at their normal height, so you can't see through them, that would definitely be helpful. The fact that there's a 6-foot fence, that would also be beneficial. And but I just wanted to make sure that if the application does get approved and go through, that these are written conditions. I noticed in the language of the agreement for the city that it's must, shall, will provide. But under these conditions, when I was reading them, some of them were that hopefully the builder developer will voluntarily do this and provide these elevations. So I really want to see those details in writing, and I think that's really important to have that in any legal contract. So, but I do appreciate the committee asking those questions earlier on because most of them were addressed.
Now, also, Mr. Scott, I want you to be aware the town runs very efficiently. You have to also understand that when these conditions are written in, you got a bylaw enforcer with fence. He's going to be watching for your interest. And you're going to have the building department. The building inspector is going to be watching for your interest. He's not going to issue a building permit unless he gets what has been agreed to, if you understand what I'm saying. So I need you to know that when you leave, you are well protected with all the conditions put in. You don't have to worry, it'll be done exactly as agreed. The applicant will have to meet all the conditions, and there are enough checks that you don't have to worry about your situation. I need you to feel comfortable with that.
Well, I mean, thank you for your comments. I don't know how comfortable the neighbourhood will be, but for the last month, it's been, I mean, we've been here for 30 years, and the new owner's been there for a few months, and he's managed to turn the entire neighbourhood on its head, and the stress level's a lot higher. I've got ring binders full of documentation. You can probably tell from the letters that we've been sending in.
Yeah, I think the bottom line, have you had anything more to add regarding the consent application?
No, I'll leave it to the rest of the neighbours, but thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'll jump in later, hopefully.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Okay, Holly?
Through you, thank you, Mr. Chair. We will just be putting the resident back into the waiting room where he will still be able to continue and see the meeting going forward. And we will bring in our next pre-registered members of the public, which would be Anne and Michael. So just give us one moment. We are bringing them in. Michael, you will be receiving a request to unmute your microphone.
Yes.
Oh, hi. It must be Anne.
Hi,
Okay.
Ann Harrison and Michael Rachushko.
Wonderful. We are just going to ask if you want to start your video. You don't have to, but it's up to you. And the floor is yours.
We'd love to have video, but we don't have it currently.
There should be, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, there should be a little video camera that you can click on and say start video.
It just says.
So that we can see the app, public member here. Right now I have a Michael there, and I have a black space.
Yeah. Sorry, Holly, I don't have a start video. I just have stop video. So I'll try stopping it and starting it again. So it's just black.
Well, we can certainly hear you. So if you wish to go forward, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I asked to make this flow smoothly. You've seen the questions we've asked. We've covered a number of topics. If you agree with them, fine. And if and then we'll leave that, and you just bring in anything new that you have to add. We're interested in anything that has been missed or could add to our decision making. I'll let you go ahead now and speak.
Thank you, Chair Clausen. Can I just ask for clarification if we'll have an opportunity to speak to the minor variances later on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if that's okay, I can answer that. Yes, you'll have the opportunity. What will happen is once we're finished with the consent portion, you will be put back into the waiting room. After I've read the PowerPoints into the record, if you have anything further you wish to speak, some new information on the minor variance, you can use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. We will be notified and we can bring you back into the meeting room to discuss your further comments.
Through Chair Clausen, thank you very much, Holly, for that information.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Ann Harrison. I'm with my husband, Michael Rachushko. We live at 17 Mary Lee Street in Fonthill, which is a property west of 1150 Line Avenue. And we'll speak specifically to the proposed consent severance that's before you. We did submit a written letter of concern, and we're going to add to that slightly in our comments at this stage. We respectfully disagree with the planning staff of the town of Pelham with regards to the fact that this consent to sever aligns with the town of Pelham's official plan. We're going to specifically speak to that. We acknowledge that the staff employed by the town have documented their support of proposals citing provincial and Golden Horseshoe plans, but we live in Pelham, and so we're going to reference specifically the official plan of our town, and in particular the special policy that describes Lot 177 of Fonthill, and that's an area bounded by South Pelham, Merritt Avenue, Line Avenue, and Quaker Road, and it's where we live and where Lot 1150 Line Avenue exists. So it's considered in a special policy of the official town plan. In the town plan, we'd like to recognize and acknowledge that change is inevitable. And we have seen examples throughout Niagara of thoughtful and intentional development, which adheres to the character of a community and is compatible with existing neighborhoods. We're gravely concerned that in Fonthill, we're beginning to see several instances where there are attempts at severing existing large properties in established neighborhoods into numerous small lots, which are incompatible and inconsistent with that neighborhood. And while the Committee of Adjustment and the Council—
I'd like to make one comment there.
Yes, Chair.
When you make that, I think Mr. Thompson has been very clear that the province demands that we look at properties where we can infill. And we've had a number of applications through the years where there are houses with big properties. I can think on Stella Street, a couple others where this has been quite common, where properties have been severed and infilled. And it's quite a common thing. I would ask Mr. Thompson to comment if he disagrees with what I said.
Through the chair. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but like there's planning policy at the provincial level, at the regional level, and at the local level. I mean, it's my report tries my best to cover all of the applicable policies and the relevant legislation and planning documents. All of the documents are hundreds of pages long. So I don't really have much else to offer other than that. I'm happy to keep listening to.
You make your report based on the rules and regulations that are out there, and they're not made based on your personal opinion. Is that correct?
Through the chair, not entirely actually. As professional planners, we're required by the Planning Institute of Ontario to depart in impartial and objective planning opinion and recommendations. So there's a variety of things that go into our recommendation. We do look at all of the applicable policy. We look at the neighborhood context and feedback from councillors, decision makers, and the public. And then we would impart our professional planning opinion. So there is a certain level of independent judgment when planners render recommendations on development applications.
Now, we have in the past had granted consents to large property where there's a house with a large lot, and we've allowed consents. Would you say that has happened a number of times in the town of Pelham?
Through the chair, like just other lots being created?
Yeah, anywhere in the town, like on Stella Street, there was we took a person's they bought a lot and they bought a house with a lot or whatever, and what do they have? They have 3 lots on one original property. Then we have another one where the guy bought a house and we severed off a parcel of property so that they could build another house there. What I'm saying, I'm trying to tell Ms. Scott there that this has been done quite a few times in the town of Pelham. This is nothing new.
And respectfully, Chair Clausen, my comments were the fact that, yes, we are seeing this done increasingly. The Committee of Adjustment, Committee of Adjustment, though, has recently stood firm and denied some of these requests, such as on Allen Crescent. And we're concerned that today's proposal to sever is yet another attempt by a developer to shoehorn in some homes in a piecemeal fashion. And specifically, if you look at special policy for the lot 177, this particular area is not indicated as an area that requires intensification. Indeed, the policy recommends that future development in this area goes to a plan for subdivision at council. I do understand what Mr. Thompson said, that in general, he indicated that you don't need a plan of subdivision if consent is approved. There will be 3 lots. And he said, in general, If you're increasing by 3 lots, you don't need it. So he's taking the number that there is 1 lot, we are severing it, or if the consent is approved today, there would be 3 lots, and therefore there would not be a need for plan of subdivision. But respectfully, I would say that the town of Pelham's official plan uses some significant wording, I think, that I think is important for this. And that is that they use phrases, they use some key phrases such as coherent, compatible, orderly, complementary, high standard, and coordinated. And I believe it's already been brought to attention that although we're not dealing with phase 3 at this point, if the severances for lots or phase 1 and phase 2 are approved, we run into a situation that we have an awkward shaped lot. And I believe it's been noted that this phase 3 would have a property with potentially deficient frontage. So my feeling is that these severances do not meet the town's plan to be coherent, compatible, orderly, and complementary. And so I think it's appropriate to say that these proposals for severance do not align with our town plan and do not align in particular with the special policy for lot 177. It does talk about intensification down by Quaker Road and South Pelham, but it does not indicate that there's a need for intensification up in this portion of the town. And on that note, I will close my comments to this. I do have some comments in regards to the variances later on. And I thank you, Mr. Clausen, or Chair Clausen, for your attention.
I'm happy that with you said, but you did bring up a very good point that I'd like to pursue, Ms. Harrison. I'd like to ask Mr. Thompson, if you've got, I know you were not supposed to consider parcel 3, but if parcel 3, I read that you could build a house, 1 single family house on parcel 3, but I think, and they brought up a good point, but it doesn't have enough frontage on Line Street. So I gather that if they wanted to build a house, they'd have to come with a minor variance for lack of frontage. Is that correct?
Through the chair, there is a condition that they obtain zoning relief for minimum lot frontage on file V8. There already is a house on that property. So they can only have 1 house on that property right now under the current zoning. So that house can continue to exist, or alternatively, if they were to build a new house, that house has to come down.
Fine. Does that make that clear, Ms. Harrison?
I think, Chair Clausen, respectfully, the concern still is that there's been conversations about what will happen next, which I understand would be a council decision, not Committee of Adjustment.
Correct.
I still feel that the 2 properties that are being created at the front will create an awkward situation. And as I said, the official plan talks about things being thoughtful and intentional. And I think this is a slapdash.
No, I'm sorry. Last time I didn't ask Bernie or Sandra if they had any questions. This time I want to make sure if you have any questions of Ms. Harrison. Bernie or Sandra? Yes, Sandra.
Through the chair, I have no questions.
Bernie?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. We will just put that resident back into the waiting room. Just takes a moment. And then we will bring our next pre-registered member of the public. That would be Steve. And we're just bringing Steve into the meeting room now. Just give us 1 moment. And we'll just be requesting you to unmute yourself so you'll be able to speak to the committee. It appears that you're unmuted if you'd like to go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Telosi.
Right now, I'm not seeing anybody. Bear with me for a second. Okay.
And we're here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I want to thank the committee members who I think did a fine job of summarizing some of the concerns that we as residents have in the area. I do want to say that this is a new experience for me. I've never been involved in a planning process before, so I'm a greenhorn and I don't understand all the technicalities, but I have been in business for the last 33 years. And when I look at a situation like this, I know I can only speak right now to the severance application. There were a number of comments that were made by various individuals. And one in particular that sticks out is that the lots that are being proposed with the severance application are similar to other lots in the area. Well, when I look at every other lot surrounding this property, mine being one of them, I'm the third house in from Line Avenue on Steffler Street. There's 4 properties that have a pool. I don't think any of these 2 lots that are being requested in this subdivision application or the severance application would be allowed to have a pool on their property. And yet every property surrounding this land is large enough to contain a pool. So I beg to differ that they're similar to the lots in the area. I also don't think that it would create a positive streetscape. But my biggest concern, and again, I have to be careful because I know I'm not supposed to speak to parcel 3 or part 3 of this plan, but I do believe that you being asked to approve the severance of these 2 lots compromises any decision that would have to be made down the road for the parcel 3. And we already know that there is a plan to develop that for multi-dwelling. And I know it has to go through rezoning. I just don't understand why we can't see a full plan so it can be smarter planning instead of the current 2 plans that are before us are approved. If they are in fact approved, then we're limiting what can go in there. I can't imagine somebody building a single family dwelling when the front of their house is going to look in the backyards of somebody else's house. That would be a real eyesore. And I just don't think that a 30+ year subdivision warrants multifamily dwellings being stuck in the middle of it. And I have to agree totally with Ms. Harrison's comments. This area has not been designated in the official plan as high intensification. So why are we even doing it? I'll leave my comments at that, and I I'd like to make some comments as well regarding the variances that are being applied for later on. Thank you.
Okay, Bernie or Sandra, do you have any questions?
Not at this point.
I have none.
I have a question. If you don't want to call me Steve, would it be easier for you to deal with this if you had a complete plan for the lot where everybody knew exactly what was going on there? Would that make life easier for you?
Mr. Chair.
Whether you agree with it or not, but at least you knew what you were commenting on, you know what's coming in?
Absolutely. To me, it's comparable to, I have this beautiful painting I want to get your opinion of, but half of it's covered. Could you give me an opinion of this painting, sir? It's just not a practical situation. And, you know, one other thing that I will say, we talked about drainage, and I know you talk about
yeah, I'd like to leave that one.
I'm sorry?
We've settled that. We've settled the drainage.
You know what? In my mind, it's not settled, Mr. Chair, and I'll tell you why. I moved into this house in 2004. 2 weeks after I moved in, my basement was completely flooded. $45,000 later of insurance work. 2 years later, I spent another $40,000 in my own pocket, had to replace all the weeping tiles. I think if you went around the neighborhood, you'd find out every home in this street in the surrounding area has had.
I think you didn't listen then. We went through it, and I got an assurance that you're not going to have this problem anymore. Okay, why don't we just leave it at that? I think we did. I was doing you a big favor. They're making sure you don't have any more problems.
Mr. Chair, I respect that, but I don't have the confidence because my house, it wasn't properly planned when this subdivision was built. I'm sorry.
It's 30 years ago. I mean, that's a matter of opinion. Right now, I got to look at the present day, and we had the players involved have assured us we're not going to have any problems with the water. We're going to bring an engineer in, and he's going to rectify all problems. And I think
Can I ask one question, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
If we do have a problem, what is my recourse? Can I sue the town?
Well, I wouldn't say that.
You know, assurances are great, but if there's no
let me put this
no remedy to the assurances, what good are they?
I must state from an engineering point of view, we can only go so far. If you got a 5,000 year storm coming, there's nothing we can do about it. There are certain things we just can't deal with, okay? They're unknowns.
Well,
But
we have a
from
lot of,
the normal day-to-day, we can rest assured we can alleviate your concerns. The public works engineer has already stated that this man knows what he's doing. Don't worry, you will be looked after. Okay,
thank you.
You're welcome. No more further questions. Holly, would you like to bring in the next person, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we will just remove the resident and put him back into the waiting room, and we will be bringing in Susan Smythe. She is our next pre-registered member of the public. Just give us one moment. And we will be requesting her to unmute her microphone.
Oh, there, okay.
It appears that she's unmuted her microphone, and there we can see her now. Thank you.
Okay, I welcome you, Susan Smythe, and you know we've discussed water. We've discussed certain things. I think we've pretty well established that these things are all looked after, and I ask that if you have anything new or whatever to add, please feel free.
Yep. So good evening, Mr. Chair and members of committee. Yes, my name is Susan Smythe. I live at 15 Stefford Street, which is just around the corner from the subject site. In addition to my written comments submitted on the 24th of September, I just want to offer a couple additional comments and request for more information from either the applicant consultant and or Mr. Thompson, the planner on the file. In what circumstance or what technical analysis and or research was provided or completed to demonstrate how the proposed severance of these two infill lots meet the intent of the official plan, particularly in terms of the respect of the character of existing development. So there's been mention of these lots being created as typical modern lots, like that being built in East Fawn Hill, for instance. But was there any streetscape analysis to understand what defines the character of this neighborhood? Secondly, to that point, what information was provided for this favorable recommendation in the planning report that this development is compatible in terms of scale and density of the existing development, especially if the proposed new lots and the frontages, lot areas and lot frontages of those two infill lots are smaller than the existing neighborhood. So what defines or what terms were used for compatibility for this recommendation? So can someone answer those questions, please?
I'll ask Mr. Thompson to answer that, please.
Through the chair, I mean, falling short of rereading my entire report into the record, there were a couple parts in our report where I spoke about the character of the existing neighborhood. You know, that it consists of a variety of 1 and 2 story houses, principally single detached dwellings, mostly on large lots, where it sits geographically. As far as streetscape and character, there's only so many mechanisms a municipality can require certain prescribed information based on the type of planning applications that are being made, which Mrs. Smythe is aware of. That being said, one of the conditions that we've requested and are not generally requested in these situations is that elevation plans be submitted. So that was specifically in response to some of those policies that talk about character in the Fawn Hill Village.
Mr. Chair, through to you, for clarity, again, with respect to an analysis, when we're talking about lot area, if we're creating 2 new lots that are less than what's existing, just as those that are found on figure 1 that you've provided in your presentation, 16 properties that are surrounding that subject site, the lot areas, and I've done just a quick analysis myself, the lot areas range from 762 square meters of lot area up to over 1,000 square meters, because you're right, there are varied lots, so they're not consistent. I get that. But what you're suggesting for these two infill lots are significantly smaller than the immediate neighborhood. So I need to understand, on what basis have you been able to generate this recommendation? Is it just based on what you see on Navigator, or was there an actual analysis completed by either the applicant's consultant and planning staff?
Let me put, Curtis, I don't want to put you in that, but why don't you talk about the fact that these lots are not, today's standards, considered small. They're considered a good size. So, I mean, you've made your decision in that. I mean, the subdivision there is over 30 years old. And we have to look at today, in today's world, as how things are today. And quite honestly, you could have made the lots even smaller. I mean, there are lots now that are 40 by 80 or whatever. You've got 50 feet of frontage and that by 100. But the problem is Mr. Thompson had to make a call, and he made the call. Based on today's standards, or Curtis, is that wrong? Do we have to think in today's standards, or do we have to replicate what happened 30 years ago?
No.
Through the chair, I mean, it's any and a lot of things. Like any planner's recommendation is going to be based off of, the current policies of the day. So, the Steffler Street subdivision, I think the homes were sometime in the 90s. So, that neighborhood was approved and contemplated given the situation of that culture of that time. Today, I mean, land is a finite resource. There's a lot of things that we're considering between public interest, private interest, infrastructure interest. So, I mean, I don't know how to say other than that this is my opinion. It's our planning department's opinion. The director of planning oversees every report that leaves this office. So I mean, I take Mrs. Smythe's comments and questions. Other than, I don't know what else to offer.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, through to you, if I can continue with my points, because this meeting has been going on a little too long. In terms of being designed to meet the typical modern lots, and it's been going around, and I appreciate that. However, I'd like to refer to those infill lots that are being developed on Bacon Lane, just around the corner. They meet the R1 regulations, and they are compatible with respect to scale and density. So it's maybe a different circumstance. It's not necessarily infill. However, those lots have adhered to majority of the R1 zone regulations. If I can move on, in accordance with the Planning Act and in your planning report, upholding public interests, I know you mentioned that this proposal for the infill lots do adhere to that. And again, my question is, on what basis was this conclusion arrived at? Especially if we're not including the full build out scenario. So that means 2 infill lots, and then what's going to be happening on part 3. So how is the public interest in terms of, what will happen being upheld? Again, moving on.
But I mean, we're getting in, and it's going to be long, but let me put it this way. There are rules and regulations. Mr. Curtis has interpreted them in a very responsible way. I think if you have any real disagreement, I think then you can very easily write your own based on the rules and regulations that he read and see what comes. I mean, we can argue this back and forth. Quite honestly, I'm not prepared to. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Nancy.
Mr. Chair, the resident has asked a question of the planner, and he's doing his best to provide a response. So if he does have a response, let's allow him to provide that response based on his professional designation as a planner. And then if you can just try to facilitate discussion between the two, and allow Mr. Thompson to provide his response to the resident.
No, I agree with that, but I don't, you know, we seem to go in the circle with the same.
Mr. Chair, through to you, if I'll just get through my last couple points. Again, we're talking about consents and infill, and we're talking about the policies that kind of guide committee to make decisions. So further point, the provincial policy statements that was referenced in the report. And again, we understand those are the minimal standards. So the town decision makers, that being Committee of Adjustment, you have the right to go beyond those minimum standards to address what are the matters of importance to the specific community. That is what's being raised tonight. In accordance with the town's official plan, particularly policy B113 on page 17, it says the financial feasibility and market potential for the proposed development will not form any decision to approve an intensification or redevelopment proposal. So I think the applicant needs to be aware of that particular proposal because I think it may be construed in that regard. With respect to the town encouraging intensification opportunities, I understand. This is an opportunity to infill. However, there is also the responsibility to make sure that the proponents are expected to demonstrate through provisions of detailed site plans, elevations, grading plans, that these proposals will be respectful, compatible, and designed to integrate with the community of the neighborhood, not of the town. There's policy specific to what is in the neighborhood. So this is essentially what I'm making mention.
So what are you asking?
Completing what will be happening in the larger parcel, not just for the two infill lots. To this point, lastly, I just want to make mention, at the time of pre-consultation, the planning staff could have had an opportunity to recommend to the applicant that they could have sought a zoning bylaw amendment and a draft plan of condominium instead of these consents and variances, where they would be obligated to complete all technical studies in advance from professionals who can do an analysis and do recommendations to determine what is the most efficient development of the site. And that's how I want to conclude my
I understand. Why don't you ask this question? Why wasn't there a complete development done? Why are we doing this piecemeal? And that question is for Mr. Thompson. That's for Mr. Maloney. Mr. Maloney, why are you coming with part of a plan which you know the people are struggling with? Why not have a development plan on the table that shows what is going to happen with all? Do you understand? These people are really concerned what's going to happen with parcel 3. And maybe there could have been a much better plan and we wouldn't have these people upset. Why didn't you come up? I mean, the applicant, he could have said, here, this is what I'm going to do with the whole acre of land that I got here. Why didn't he do it that way?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I think Ms. Smythe would recognize this as in her position as a planner, is that you have different options as to what you can do. You can make an application for a plan of subdivision or rezoning of the whole lot.
I don't want to get into the legality. I just want to know why is he doing it piecemeal? Why is he doing it piecemeal? Why is he just going with 2 lots and now figure out what I'm going to do with the rest later on? That's what she's asking.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you allow me to finish, I don't frame it as being a piecemeal approach. He has a full right to approach it this way. And quite frankly, the consent process is usually a quicker process to allow development of the site in a quicker manner and then deal with the remnant parcel at a later date. This is not a piecemeal approach. This is a normal process that is undertaken in these type of applications. And the decision was made, as was his right, to do it. And I think if Mr. Kernahan wishes to make a comment on this as well, but this is within our client's right to do this. And I don't think he's obligated, as Ms. Smythe would recognize, to do a development of the full site. And there was a pre-consultation process undertaken, and this is the manner that was chosen. So, Mr. Kernahan, I defer to you on this one as well.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be argumentative or anything. I understand where they're coming from, and we've heard a number when I've asked directly that this whole thing would be much easier for them to deal with if they knew what was going on with part 3. And I'm not interested in figuring out what part 3, but I can understand why these people are upset. And it's very difficult under the circumstances when there's a big unknown to keep the people happy. That's the fact of life. And they have, just as Antonio has a right to decide how he wants to develop, these people have a right to express their concerns and demand that their concerns are met to certain degrees. So here, the three of us, we got to figure out what are we going to do with this thing here. And she's asked questions. Now, you got two planners discussing the matter here. And I don't want to have a battle or anything, but I want to make it clear that we've been able to address certain issues, but this one issue that we can't is the uncertainty. How do we deal with an uncertainty? That's my problem as being chairman. How do I deal with this uncertainty that I hear from these people? And I could quite rightly be said that it's none of my business. I don't know. Maybe it isn't none of my business, but I do hear people. I hear them. And we have an obligation to listen to the people that are affected. That's all I'm saying. So anything more, Ms. Spice?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Nancy.
Yes, thank you. I just want to explain to the listening residents and to the committee members as well. It is quite typical for developers to begin with smaller developments. Sometimes they do that to generate the income in order to go ahead with the infrastructure that's needed for the large development. The town of Pelham receives applications from the general public, from developers, from individuals, and there is a pre-consultation process. And we are obligated to process those applications as they are submitted. What the committee's role is today is to look at the two lots that are proposed on the frontage on Line Avenue and whether or not it is suitable to create those two lots. Once that decision is made, the committee will be compelled then to deal with the minor variance applications that are associated with those two lots. Any development that occurs on the remnant parcel, Part 3, will be done through the appropriate planning processes that are set out in the Planning Act. That will require, in many instances, additional public meetings, and the members of the public who have been circulated on these applications will be notified as well. And if there is a rezoning associated, the circulation actually is broader. So what the committee is looking at today is not related to the remnant parcel development. That will come at a later stage. Right now, the committee is compelled to deal with the two parcels on Line Avenue, both the consents and minor variances. I hope that helps explain to the public that it is not atypical to receive applications in this fashion and have the broader development come at a later time.
I thank you, Nancy, but I'd ask the following question. As the three of us, are we being told that we don't have to be concerned about the neighborhood's concerned about what's going on? We just ignore that and just deal with the two parcels without any concern about
that's not at all what I'm saying, Mr. Chair. What I'm saying is that there will be further opportunity when the owner knows what type of development is going to occur on that larger parcel. There will be further opportunity. All of the concerns of the residents as they relate to the two consent applications are in the record. They will become part of this record. And we have a vast advantage here at the town of Pelham in that we have professionals from our planning department and our public works department here at the meeting to hear firsthand what the concerns are. That's not the case across the province. It is the case in Pelham. So we do have an advantage there. All of the concerns and questions are part of the public record, part of the official record, and our staff are here to hear them as well.
Right. So your concerns have been heard, Ms. Smythe, and if any of the other men, Mr. Lara or Ms. Marsh, if you had any questions, go ahead, Brennan.
Through the chair, very interesting file. When I first looked at this, I thought, you're right, Mrs. Smythe is totally correct. These are very small lots in a neighborhood with very big lots. So I just thought that normally we get a minor variance on a property. However, we got 5 minor variances on each property. Like that, to me, that doesn't show any respect to the town's planning and what we have in Fonthill to deal with. So having 5 minor variances on each property, to my knowledge, is pushing the limit. Maybe the developer could put 1 building on that lot and that would satisfy everybody, because it would be approximately 1,000-meter lot.
Yeah, I hear your point. What about you, Sandra?
That's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
I have no further questions for Ms. Smythe.
Okay.
Comments.
I have no further questions. If you're all right.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just want to just the last thing is with respect to the conditions of this consent, is it to be fulfilled within 1 year? Because typically that's usually what conditions are. Because my concern is if part 3 remains as is, it's deficient lot frontage. So
that has been answered.
We're going to permit a lot that's deficient. That's my only concern.
No, we've answered that. We've asked those questions. I mean, we're not dealing with part 3.
I know, but it will be a remnant piece that's deficient of its existing.
Well, as far as I'm concerned,
frontage.
It's not our problem. It has nothing to do with the 3 of us. We're not
Through
looking
you,
at
Mr.
that.
Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. There is a condition that will be required to be satisfied within the 1 year that addresses the all of the parcels.
No, I mentioned that's been
Yes.
very strong. That point has been made quite often. So
Okay, and that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening.
You're welcome. Okay, Holly.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We will just be moving the resident back into the waiting room and bringing in our next pre-registered residents. As I indicated, Gordon.
Let's have a 2-minute break. I'll be right back.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a 2-minute recess. The next resident will be Carol and Bill. Oh.
No.
They're not here anymore? Let me just check my email. Maybe they decided to leave. Okay.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. As I had previously indicated, Gordon had advised that he no longer wished to speak to the committee. Our next residents that we had scheduled was Carol and Bill McRae. I understand they have now left the meeting. They're no longer in our waiting room. I have confirmed by checking my email to see that they have not emailed me indicating any potential technology issues. It just appears that perhaps they've just left. So our next pre-registered member of the public is Melody. She's a new registration and we'll just be bringing her into the meeting now. So just give us one moment.
Just while we're waiting for Melody to join the meeting, I just wanted to remind the members of the public that one of the conditions requested by the planning department is that all necessary zoning amendments be obtained for part 3, which includes but may not be limited to the lot frontage. So that has been requested as a condition of consent. We would not be creating a parcel with deficient frontage. That condition must be fulfilled within the 1 year.
Yeah, I welcome you, Melody.
Thank you.
You've heard all the comments, and that I suggest I just don't want to go over anything that's discussed before, but you have a right to speak. If you have anything new to add, feel free. I'll give you the floor.
I will probably refresh a few things that have been already spoken, because unfortunately where I live is on the south side of the property on 1146 Line Avenue. And as a result, I do have to address issues pertaining to part 3 rather than part 1 and 2. Because
we're not going to deal with part 3 at all.
I understand, sir, but we have to look at the bigger picture here rather than just looking at part 1 and 2. By the agreement of part 1 and 2, it indirectly affects part 3. We've talked about the
but we've already
frontage.
We've asked Mr. Tom, we've asked the questions and everything else. I just ask you to keep your comments based on the 2 parcels that we're going to vote on, whether we're going to give the consent or not. And we are not going to take any consideration of what's going on with parcel number 3. And the only thing we've addressed that could affect is flooding, and we've addressed that. But what's going on with part 3 is not to be discussed. You can discuss that when any applications are made and give your thoughts at that time. But I would suggest not here. Go ahead.
My question then, sir, would be how will it minimize future development then? If we accept part 1 and part 2, how will that minimize that future development? When we have already spoken to the developer and he has already told us what the future plans are for that.
Well, I don't know that. First, that is just, as far as I'm concerned,
Mr. Chair?
I mean, it's something that is not. Why isn't the applicant here discussing it?
That's what I would like to know as well.
Yeah, go ahead,
and
Nancy.
I do agree with Bernie Law in the sense of I would agree with him. 1 building should be going on that property rather than what I'm hearing is a townhouse with 7 properties in the back. So we're going to be looking at the possibility of 7 individuals living in that, or 7 families living in that property in the back. So we are going to be looking at increased traffic on that property, something that we are not used to as residents here in this house for 30 years. So we have to look at this.
You're
as well.
speculating. We have no knowledge. The 3 of us have no knowledge. We have not been shown any drawings.
We do know that there is a road going there, sir, on the south side.
Pathway. It's not considered a road.
Pathway, road, traffic.
Mr. Chair,
whatever we talk about, it is there, sir.
I mean, for all we know, it's just only going to be 1 house back there. We don't know that.
Mr. Chair, let's let the resident ask her question, and then we'll turn to the planning department, the engineering department, and the consultants.
Thank you.
To provide the responses.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
Yes, I am particularly concerned, sir, because I do live on the south side of this property. I do have a driveway that I have to consider, roadway, whatever you want to call. I do not know, the developer has not addressed the issue of whether or not he is going to be putting lighting, which means that my backyard is going to be directly affected by lighting in my backyard. I do not know how much increased traffic I'm going to have going to part 3. I have very much concerns about very unknown variables here, and nothing's being addressed. The developer has not given me any information whatsoever, and nothing is in these plans that have been mailed to our home. Well, and I do agree. Nothing. I would feel much better if these plans were put on hold or delayed or given much better addressed.
Curtis, you asked this question with regard to parcel 3, which really affects them, and we've heard it quite often. How do we answer these people's concern when we don't know what's going on in parcel 3 and we're not supposed to deal with it? How do you address Ms. Foster's concern?
Through the chair, from speaking from the municipality's perspective, the answer is rather blunt, and that we can't, because they're not actually applying for these things today. There's no site plan control application before us right now that would, potentially contain lighting standards for a private laneway development, which doesn't exist today. And preceding today's meeting and following, if these consents get approved, there can still only be one house on part 3 until such time as they obtain zoning approval at a future date. I'd like to defer to the planning consultant because we may have something further to add to this.
Planning consultant.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Curtis. The only thing I can really add to that is that the reason why we haven't provided you with those details in terms of lighting and design is because we haven't arrived at them yet. Planning is very much an iterative process. Things happen in stages, and the development plans for this property have not been finalized. Once they have, they will be submitted to the planning department along with applications for approval of whatever planning applications are appropriate to implement them. And at that time, there will be a thorough public process that will involve ultimately a public meeting at council and a determination by council as to whether or not to approve those applications. Through that process, those details will be provided to you. And just like this evening, you will have an opportunity to provide your comments on them. But at this point in time, those plans have not been finalized. Those applications have not been made. It would be disingenuous of us to show you some sort of preliminary application because it very well might change as the process progresses, and it's just not appropriate to do that. So I will leave it at that you will have an opportunity. You will be shown those details, but at this point in time, they're not available. What details there are available are related to these 2 applications for consent. And that's what we're here before you to talk about this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Kernahan. But at the same time, I am also saying, how can we make a decision on part 1 and part 2 when we do not know what is happening with part 3? There are so many unknown variables. We cannot address part 1 and part 2 today. So I propose we put everything on hold. Or we look at what Mr. Law had said, and that would be put 1 unit on this property. Keep it large and keep it simple, because the driveway should not be coming beside my home where I have lived for 30 years and enjoyed the privacy of a rural setting like I always have. And the other 14 owners that live in this surrounding area have done the same. Thank you. That's all I need to say.
No, I hear you. And, I could ask some questions. I don't think it would be appropriate for me, but I'll be personally, I'm having a hard time with this because I hear the 2 sides and I'm told how we can't deal with part 3, yet I have to be blunt. I don't agree with that. I think we have to look at part 3 because part 3 creates a huge problem because it's called an unknown. And it's an unknown.
It's a big variable. And
I think the developer would have really helped himself if he would have come with a complete plan so that everybody could look at it. I don't think we'd be going through all this.
Absolutely. And Mr. Clausen, to address one other thing that you had told me not to mention, it's impossible to even consider a pond in the back of that yard with the flooding issues. We also have a thing called West Nile. Mosquitoes are very, very prevalent in this area with the
Ms. Foster, let me...
I know, I'm not supposed to.
I'm just putting out there's a number of possibilities.
There's a number of possibilities, I know.
I can tell you what kind of designs could be done.
Yes, but this is something...
There's a number of ways of doing it. I just use an expression.
Yeah, but we also, on my side of the property...
Don't worry about it.
On my side of the property, we have a creek, a natural creek that runs, and I don't think anyone has addressed that natural creek that runs on our property. And nobody has addressed the flooding or concerns of that creek, which floods every spring. I'm sure Mr. Law knows about it. He's been to our property. He knows what I'm talking about. It runs every spring and
Let
floods.
me tell you, Ms. Foster, I think we'll close it here. We've heard
Yes, absolutely.
all the concerns. Believe me, we've
I
heard them.
hope you do. I really
And
hope you do.
we value your time. We value what you said, and we've heard from the developer, and we have a decision to make.
I don't think the developer has addressed it, though, is what I'm telling you, though.
Well,
I don't think he's looked at it properly. But anyway,
Okay.
I've said my piece. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
So is there any more? Are there any more people involved?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we no longer have any pre-registered members of the public. I'm just going to check our clerks at pelham.ca email to see if there are any email comments having been received. And I can report it is 6:24 and we have not received any emails. So as far as the consent applications go for B7 and for B8, you can close the public portion of the meeting and deliberate on the consent portions. Following decisions of the consent, we would be hearing the minor variance.
Okay. So we have a decision that we have to make now. Okay. Let me ask you this. Does anybody want to state their opinion? Bernie, you want to state an opinion before you vote so that people know the way you feel? Sandra, do you want to state an opinion so people know how you feel? Sandra, you go ahead first. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to thank the town's planning department, the engineering firm, and Mr. Maloney for all of their comments and detailed reports. And I'm prepared to make a motion for both files B7 and B8 to move them forward. That's my comments.
Do I have a seconder?
No.
And I won't second it either.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the member is making a motion to go right to considering the applications. Remember that making a second to the motion gets it on the floor.
Yes. So it's
for
not on the
discussion.
floor.
It's not on the floor yet. There is no motion on the floor. Perhaps the member would like to explain her rationale for making a motion. She hasn't actually made a motion to grant the approvals. She's just saying she's ready to make a decision. So perhaps you might want to turn to the member to further elaborate on
Maybe I didn't hear
on her
correctly.
motion.
Sandra, are you making a motion to grant the consent, or what is your motion exactly, please? Go ahead.
My motion for both files B7 2020p and B8 2020p is that the application for consent for part 1 be granted, to convey part 1 and the partial discharge of mortgage to be granted, and that the following conditions: to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works, to ensure that all lots are fully serviced individually, to submit a drawing indicating the location of servicing, to obtain a driveway entrance and culvert permit, and to submit an overall lot grading and drainage plan, and to submit a tree saving plan, and to the satisfaction of the Director of the Community Planning and Development, to obtain all necessary zoning approvals for part 1, to conduct a stage 1-2 archaeological assessment, to provide elevation plans, to install a 6-foot tall fence around the north side of the lot line of part 1, to plant 3 large trees, and to execute the town's memorandum of understanding. And to the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, that the Secretary Treasurer be provided a registrable legal description, a copy of the deposited reference plan, and that the final certification fee of $395 be provided. This decision is based on the following reasons. The application conforms to the policies of the Town of Pelham Official Plan, Regional Policy Plan, Provincial Policy Statement, and complies with the town's zoning bylaw. The decision is rendered having regard to the provisions of section 5124 and 5125 of the Planning Act as amended. No objections to the proposal were received from commenting agencies or properties, and the Committee of Adjustment considered all written and oral submission and finds that, subject to the conditions and the provisional consent, the application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent with provincial policy statement, and complies with growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town's official plan. Should I also provide the reasons for consent for file B8?
Correct. Yes. And you could, instead of reading, you could say that they're all the same. Holly, is that okay?
They are, through the chair, they are actually a little bit different.
Okay, then go ahead and read them.
So file 8B 2020P 1150 Line Avenue Part 2, application for consent to convey Part 2 and a partial discharge of mortgage is hereby granted, and the decision is subject to the following conditions: to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works, to ensure all lots are serviced individually, to submit a drawing indicating location of the servicing, obtain a driveway entrance and culvert permit, submit an overall lot drainage and grading plan, submit a tree saving plan, to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development, obtain all necessary zoning approvals for Part 2, and obtain all the necessary zoning approvals for Part 3, conduct a stage 1-2 archaeological assessment, provide elevation plans, plant 3 large trees, execute town memorandum of understanding, to the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, that the Secretary Treasurer be provided a registerable legal description, copy of deposited reference plan, final certification fee of $395. And this decision is based on the following reasons: the application conforms to the policies of the Town of Pelham Official Plan, Regional Policy Plan, Provincial Policy Statement, and complies with the town's zoning bylaws. The decision is rendered having regard to the provisions of Section 5124 and 5125 of the Planning Act as amended. No objections to this proposal were received from commenting agencies or neighboring property owners. The Committee of Adjustment considered all written and oral submissions and finds that, subject to the conditions and provisional consent, this application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Regional Official Plan, and the Town Official Plan.
Okay, I would like you to make one little change. You said no objections to this proposal were received from commenting agencies or neighboring property owners. You'll have to leave that out. The neighboring property owners have quite vehemently objected, so I would not say that there was no objections.
Through the chair, I agree with that amendment.
Pardon?
Through the chair, I agree with that amendment.
Okay. So we have that on the floor. Do I have a seconder for that? So Nancy, if we don't get a seconder, what do we do there?
A seconder gets the motion on the floor and then allows the committee members to vote on the motion. And you can vote to support the motion or vote not to support the motion. The only way to control the vote now that you've made the motion is to get a seconder, get it on the floor, and call the vote.
Okay.
And there's no one seconder, so how do we vote on it?
So the committee is required to make a decision, and under parliamentary law, if you need to have a seconder in order to have a debate to get the motion on the floor for debate, then you call the vote.
Then we call the vote. Okay, Bernie, you're the second.
Second motion.
Okay, fine. Do we want to debate it? Or do you want to get into a vote? Bernie, have you got anything to say?
My concern is if we go ahead with Sanders' recommendation, what does that do to the minor variances and the final approval of this lot to happen? Like, do we have 2 votes here tonight?
Right now, the motion is for the consents only. Okay.
So we're not dealing with the minor variances.
We're not dealing with the variances yet.
If we vote against this, then there is no minor variance. The minor variance only comes in if we agree to the consent. That's the way I understand it. I could be corrected.
If the consents are not granted, I will review with the committee, or Holly will review with the committee what needs to happen with the variances. The committee is compelled to make a decision on these applications. So you've seconded the motion?
Yes, I did second the motion.
To get a vote on the floor. Okay.
So Member Law could now speak to the motion that's on the floor.
You
Yes,
can speak to it.
I will
If you have
not
any
vote.
objection or you're for it, feel free to give your opinion.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've got many notes here to support my decision, and my decision is not to vote in favor of this amendment.
Consent, are you talking consent?
Talking about the consents right now, Mr. Lowe.
Yes, the consent. Well, I'm not in favor of the consent.
Oh, fine. That's what we're supposed to hear. And then I have a problem too with the consents. Quite honestly, I think it's premature. I think I know maybe I'll get in trouble, but I think the surrounding neighborhood have a very good argument. I think, contrary to what provincial law says, I think people that live in the area have a right to their opinion and having a right to know what's going on. And right now they don't know what's going on. We're going to create a big problem with this consent. I'm not saying I'm against it, but I think it's premature. Rather than not grant consent, I would rather have this thing put in abeyance and give the developer a chance to complete what he has in mind and bring the whole thing to the table and deal with it all at one time. And then I think the neighbors would be more at ease, because from the letters I've read, a number of them said they're not against development, but they're against how this thing is handling. So it's not as if we got people that are saying they don't want development or whatever. They want something done in an orderly fashion. So quite honestly, from where I stand, I'm not against the consent, but I'm against voting for it now. I do not think it's appropriate until the neighbors are given a piece of paper that shows exactly what this developer has in mind, and it gets all the paperwork, everything done. And there are reasons why he's handled it the way, and I won't comment anything on that. But I do honestly believe that the owners have a right to know what the final outcome was going. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know. So Nancy, I would rather abstain from voting until we can get this thing that we know that we can tell the owners around there what's going on.
So right now you have a motion on the floor to approve, and the applications have been presented to you. If the motion fails, when you call the vote, if it fails 2-1, the committee needs to give reasons for refusal under the Statutory Powers Procedures Act. You must state reasons for approval, because if this then is elevated to the local appeals tribunal, your decision must include reasons for refusal. That's mandatory under the Planning Act and the Statutory Powers Procedures Act. The only way to abstain from voting would be if the applicant were to request an adjournment of the application, but you may want to hear from the applicant in that regard, but they have submitted their application based on the proposal that they wish to make at this time.
Well, I've heard from Mr. Kernahan saying that right now they don't want to talk about what they have in mind. You had I forgot the last woman there that talked, that lives right next to her with her concerns and that. And she quite legitimately asked what's going on. And she has a right to know. She's very much affected. I look at it, and I look at that if he would have come with what he had in mind, laid it out on the table, I think this thing would fly without any problem. Not without any problem, but there would be a lot less problems. I think it's much easier to deal with something when you know what's going on than when you don't know what's going on. And I mean, Mr. Kerner, I won't say what's going on. I hear one say, well, the guy's going to have 7 townhouses there. The applicant is already.
So Mr. Chair, you have
here saying that, but
you have a motion on the floor. You have a motion on the floor. So if you wish to proceed with the hearing, you have a motion on the floor. If you want to call for the vote, and then if the motion is denied, then we do have reasons that Member Law and you have stated into the record. You just need to state reasons for a refusal if the motion dies.
In the records, in part of our correspondence from the planning department, the variance maintains the general.
Member Law, we're not talking about the variance
No, we
right
already
now.
talked about the consent,
Oh,
Bernie. We don't get into that at all, okay?
Mr. Chair, I will need to direct you if the consents are not approved. I will need to give you some advice with regard to the variances. We can't just let them fall. So I would compel you to call the vote on the motion that's on the floor.
Okay. Then we will, I will call the vote on the floor. So all those for, raise your hand. Motion granted.
So the applications have now been granted. And now you have minor variance applications that are associated with the consent applications.
So now we have to start the next phase of this.
Right, so you've just approved the 2 consent applications. We now will move forward to the minor variances.
Correct. So I would ask Holly to read the summary presentation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, just give us a moment to get the PowerPoint up on the screen for the benefit of those watching and the committee. Please note that the applications and the reports were very similar, so we condensed both applications into one PowerPoint presentation, which I will read into the record. Just give me one moment. Participants are reminded, ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you will be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you'll be removed from the meeting. Participant microphones and video cameras will remain off until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by the committee, your microphones will be muted. Once voting on item has taken place, participants will be removed from the meeting completely. You may resume viewing the meeting via live stream. Decorum. Committee of Adjustment is a formal public hearing requiring decorum, meaning all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you will be given an opportunity to address the committee at the public portion of the meeting. Again, I urge those in the waiting room, if you wish to provide new information with regards to the minor variance, please use the raise your hand icon when we are at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and you wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note, comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting. Otherwise, they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will not be tolerated. Cheering, booing, or hissing from the gallery will not be tolerated. Please note, if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. This is for file A25 and A26/2020P 1150 Lyon Avenue. Excerpts from Planning Report. The subject parcels, shown as Part 1 and Part 2, are located on the west side of Lyon Avenue, lying north of Bacon Lane in the town of Pelham. The minor variance application requests relief from Section 13.2A, minimum lot area, to permit a lot area of 533 meters square, whereas 700 meters square is required. Section 13.2B, minimum lot frontage, to permit a lot frontage of 15.2 meters, whereas 19 meters is required. Section 13.2C, maximum lot coverage, to permit a maximum lot coverage of 55%, whereas 30% is required. Section 13.2D, minimum front yard, to permit a minimum front yard of 6 meters, whereas 7.7 meters is required. Section 13.2E, minimum interior side yard, to permit a minimum interior side yard of 1.5 meters, whereas 1.8 meters is required. To date, the following comments have been received. Building Department, building permits will be required. Public Works, no comments. Public. All public comments as shown on the slideshow for B7/2020P have been considered for this application and read into the record. Is the variance minor in nature? The proposed reduced lot area and lot frontage are minor in nature given the surrounding area. Smaller lot sizes are increasingly becoming common throughout the town, region, and province. The reduced lot area can still comfortably accommodate the proposed dwelling, landscaped amenity area, parking, and drainage. Increasing the lot coverage beyond 30% is reasonable and practical given modern civil design and infrastructure standards. Given the local site context, including the proposed lot area, the proposed 55% coverage would yield a building footprint of 293 meters square. Planning staff are of the opinion that this is somewhat excessive to accommodate a larger gross floor area, given the lot size and considering most new dwellings include finished basements, effectively doubling livable floor area, notwithstanding permitted second stories. Recognizing that some lot increase is appropriate given the situation, a maximum lot coverage of 50% is recommended as being minor in nature. Reducing the front yard setback is objectively minor in nature as it will provide an opportunity to enhance the public realm and landscape along Line Avenue by providing more street edge enclosed with the benefit of appropriate urban design and thoughtful building design. The reduced front yard setback will help maintain the consistent building alignment along Line Avenue with the existing housing, recognizing that the adjacent dwelling fronting Stelford Street to the north enjoys a Line Avenue exterior side yard setback of 5 meters in accordance with the R1 zone regulations. Reducing the side yard setback in relation to the reduced parcel size can still comfortably accommodate a new dwelling. The rear yard amenity area complies with the default R1 zoning requirements. Subject to conditions, the side yard setback reduction will not induce any land use incompatibility concerns. The reduced side yard setbacks according to the Ontario Building Code, which contemplates 1.2 meter side yard setbacks as an industrial practice. Is the variance desirable for the development or use of the land? The variance to reduce the minimum lot area and lot frontage are desirable for the land because it allows for the creation of an additional residential building lot on a large underutilized open space with delineated built boundary for the Fonthill urban settlement area. The reduced lot size and lot frontage will be indistinguishable from surrounding residential lots. Planning staff are of the opinion that a variety of lot sizes are not inherently harmful to neighborhood character. Through the proposed lot coverage, increase is not required. Some degree of increase is considered desirable in this instance because it will help facilitate a wider range of one-story bungalow house designs, which would be challenging at the default 30% requirement. This requested permission may help alleviate privacy concerns to adjacent neighbors, which have expressed issues for possibilities of two-story dwellings. The increased lot coverage will help facilitate a larger building footprint, gross floor area for the new dwelling, which is in keeping with the large homes nearby characteristic of the neighborhood. Reducing the building setback is desirable for the subject lands because it will offer more design flexibility, help facilitate a more comparable building alignment along Line Avenue while still avoiding any negative impacts associated with its permissions. Adequate open space amenity area remains for resident recreation and for stormwater drainage purposes. The proposed spatial separation between property lines is also consistent with contemporary development standards and should not adversely impact the leisure and privacy of others. Does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan? The variance to reduce the minimum lot area and lot frontage maintains the policy intended for the official plan because they will allow for intensification of an existing neighborhood with a delineated built boundary, add to the housing supply, support existing infrastructure, maintain and make more efficient use of large existing residential lots. The minor variance in lot area and lot frontage will not negatively impact the character of the neighborhood, but instead help strengthen and diversify the housing stock. The variance will aid in a gentle intensification of existing urban settlement areas, policy A2.2.2. Does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan? In planning staff's opinion, the proposed increase lot coverage of 55% is not adequately justified, or it is completely warranted according to considerations of policy E1.5 of the official plan, which discuss the requirements for the applicant to demonstrate that the zoning provision is neither not warranted, causes undue hardship, or is otherwise impossible to comply with. However, planning staff recognize that some increase will continue to maintain the general intent of the official plan because it will still help facilitate compatible residential development through the use of large building footprints, gross area, characteristic of the neighborhood. Respecting the character neighborhood is also one of the policy objectives of the official plan. The proposed reduction in yard setbacks maintain the general intent of the official plan because it helps to facilitate compatible residential development through the use of larger building footprints, gross floor areas given the reduced lot size, and compact urban development. The reduced yard setbacks will also help ensure the pedestrian-friendly policies of the official plan are upheld, particularly with respect to good urban design principles and positive streetscape interfaces throughout the public realm. Does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? The variance seeking reduction in minimum lot area and lot frontage provisions maintain the general intent of the zoning bylaw plan because they will continue allowing for single detached residential dwellings in low density R1 zone, albeit on a slightly smaller parcel. The proposed lot area and lot frontage are still in keeping with the surrounding neighborhood. In planning staff's opinion, adverse impacts associated with the proposed minor variance in lot area and lot frontage appear to be very remote prospects and unlikely to alleviate through the process of rezoning. On the contrary, a zoning bylaw amendment application could quite possibly invite a denser housing form, multi-units, even less suited for the neighborhood homeowners' preferences than the current proposal, as an alternative development strategy. Planning staff are of the opinion that a lot coverage increase, if limited to the maximum of 50%, will not conflict with the general intent of the zoning bylaw because it will continue to allow for adequate landscaped amenity area, stormwater management, and relatively compatible building scales. The increased lot coverage offers more opportunity for the builder to explore one-story bungalow-style homes as opposed to two-story buildings, which has caused some angst amongst neighbors, particularly to the north. The proposed reduction in yard setback is less than what is required by the bylaw, but still includes ample space for building maintenance purposes, spatial separation between uses, and adequate open space amenity areas for the zoning bylaw was intended. The proposed front yard reduction actually better complements the existing streetscape alignment, considering the existing building setback of 2 Stefflar Street flanking Line Avenue in closer to 5 meters pursuant to R1 zoning regulations. However, planning staff have suggested modifying the requested front yard setback to ensure that only the dwelling face, front wall, is included in the reduction to avoid any unwanted dominance of overhead garage doors. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommend that applications A25-2020P and A26/2020P be approved. Minimum lot area 533 meters square approved. Minimum lot frontage 15.2 meters approved. Maximum lot coverage 50% approved. Minimum front yard 6 meters to dwelling face approved. 7.7 meters to garage approved. Minimum exterior side yard 1.7 meters approved, subject to the following conditions. For application A25/2020P, that all necessary building permits are required prior to construction commencing to the satisfaction of the chief building official. That the approval of the minor variance is subject to the consent files B7/2020P and B8/2020P obtain final approval. That prior to the issuance of a building permit to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Development and Planning, provide dwelling elevation plans that positively contribute to the public street through the use of a front porch, windows symmetrically proportioned to the building's mass, and a congruent use of exterior cladding, etc. And if windows are proposed on the north facade, they shall be clear slurred style or similar as applicable to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. for application A26/2020P that all necessary building permits are required prior to construction commencing to the satisfaction of the chief building official, that the approval of the minor variance is subject to consent files B7/2020P and B8/2020P obtaining final approval. To the satisfaction of the Director of Development and Community Planning, provide dwelling elevation plans that positively contribute to the public street through the use of a front porch, windows symmetrically proportioned to the building's mass, and concurrent use of exterior cladding to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then we still have the applicants here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we do have the applicants here. Perhaps they may want to speak to the minor variance applications.
Yes, I will ask who wants to take the floor for the minor variance applications.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that Mr. Kernahan just briefly summarize his opinion as it relates to the minor variances. You would have heard his submissions on the package almost 3 hours ago. So I'm just going to have Mr. Kernahan summarize that, and then I do have some brief submissions as it relates only to the minor variances. So okay, if I can ask Mr. Kernahan.
Mr. Kernahan, yeah, I appreciate that we keep this compact. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll be as brief as I can. I appreciate the very detailed analysis that was done by planning staff, and with respect to the variances related to lot geometry and the interior side yard setback, I can submit to you that we're in agreement with those for most of the same reasons that planning staff cited. In my view, the official plan provides some very prescriptive performance criteria for when intensification is appropriate. And in the instance here, I think the developer's done a really good job of trying to balance some pretty antiquated zoning that was written in 1987 with current development standards. And we proposed some lot geometry here, which I believe is a good fit for this neighborhood, and it balances the new with the old and the existing in a way that can appropriately integrate that development in the neighborhood. In terms of consistency with the intent of the zoning bylaw, my submission to you is that all the requested variances, including lot coverage and minimum front yard setback, are that. The applicant's intent is to develop a housing form that will be attractive and that won't have a garage protruding, but they wouldn't want to be prejudiced against having the type of unit which they have in mind for this location, which would include a flush face between the garage and the front of the dwelling, and to have that within 6 meters of the front yard setback would be his preference, and in my view would be positive from a streetscape perspective. In terms of lot coverage, the intent of the zoning bylaw is to ensure there are no drainage or massing impacts, and my submission to you is that those would not be realized in this instance. In terms of desirability and appropriateness, I don't want to dwell too much on those two things, other than to say that this is a very large, underutilized piece of property. My submission is that there's a plan in process here which has due consideration for an efficient development plan, and it won't preclude further development in the future in an appropriate way. In terms of minor, in no way are the number or the magnitude of variances an appropriate consideration for what is minor. Minor relates to impacts. My submission is that the geometry of these lots would have no negative impact to the neighborhood. Though different, they are consistent and compatible, and all of the proposed reductions in setbacks and increases in lot coverage are are appropriately mitigated through the conditions which staff has proposed. So for those reasons, my submission to you is that from a planning perspective, the requested variances as submitted by myself are appropriate because they meet the 4 tests as prescribed in the Planning Act, and we request that you approve them as applied for. Thank you.
You're welcome. So what you're saying, you agree with Curtis's assessment?
By and large, Mr. Chair, that's correct. I'll
Okay.
submit to Mr. Maloney to summarize my our opinion on that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just in summary, in terms of our submissions on the minor variance application. So again, this committee has been given a legislative function to provide a decision based on a review of Section 45 of the Planning Act. So the focus is on those variances or the minor variances. Now you've heard, again, evidence from Mr. Kernahan as well as the planning report of Mr. Thompson in support of each of the variances based on that review of Section 45 of the Planning Act. So in some ways, they're offering you the objective expert land use planning evidence that these should be supported. I kind of break these variances down into sort of 2 different categories. The first 2 relate to minimum lot area, minimum lot frontage. So this is about the lot. And I think one of the concerns of the neighbors and what might be of this committee is that is this lot too small for the area? And I think that with a lot area of 533 square meters and a frontage of 15.2 meters is still a rather large lot in the grander scheme of things. Mr. Kernahan did address that this is a 1987 bylaw, so it is quite old. But I think what the committee needs to recognize is that while it may not be as large as the lots on the adjacent properties, they are still compatible. Compatible means that they aren't the exact same as. They have to be sort of capable of living in harmony in some way of describing it. So they may not be the exact same, but it's still a large lot that can accommodate a single detached dwelling. With respect to the other 3 variances, with respect to maximum lot coverage and minimum front yard and minimum interior side yard, I think you heard the comments from Mr. Thompson and Mr. Kernahan that most of those variances are being requested for design reasons. As we've made very clear to this committee, and in some ways to address some of the concerns of Mr. Scott, being the owner of 2 Steffler, that our intention is to build a bungalow on this property. And in order to achieve the design of a bungalow, we do need to increase the maximum lot coverage, and we do need to reduce the front yard setback and the interior side yard setback. So those are the sort of design aspects to allow for a bungalow, which is something that I think the neighbors would prefer over a large 2-story dwelling. So as I said, we addressed those concerns, or we tried to address those concerns of the neighbor. There is the conditions that are being attached to the minor variance, and it was alluded to earlier, but I think it is important to note that the one condition in particular requires our client to provide elevation drawings that will show how the front of the building will look, including a front porch and symmetrical windows and that sort of thing. So that will contribute to satisfying a concern as it relates to the streetscape and making sure that it is compatible with the neighborhood in terms of the streetscape. But the other more important part is that there is the condition as it relates to the type of windows being installed. We discussed that at length, and that is to address any issues of privacy or overlook. So with respect, I do ask that you approve the applications for minor variance as applied for. I would ask that you maintain the approval for the front yard setback to 6 meters across the board and not distinguish between. And again, that's for design reasons. We need that our client needs that flexibility. And again, with the lot coverage, I know Mr. Law had some issues about possibility of drainage. And I think Mr. Marr addressed that issue that even though there will be an increase in lot coverage, there will still be a lot grading and drainage plan that will address how that drainage will work. and the water will be collected from a dwelling that may have the larger lot coverage and dispersed towards the street in a sufficient outlet. And I ask that, of course, you approve the applications as applied for, subject to the conditions recommended by planning staff. So subject to any further questions, those are my submissions as it relates to the minor variance.
I have a few questions. First question, you said that's 6 feet. You also had to the garage 7 meters. I'm still from the feed in, but 6 meters, but there's also stipulation there for 7. Are you saying there is no requirement for the 7 meter setback at the garage?
Mr. Chair, to clarify, the relief requested was a 6 meter front yard setback, and that would be to both the dwelling and the garage. Now, in candidly, in speaking with my client, he does intend to recess the garage a little bit, but he doesn't want to be imposed the setback for the garage of 7.7 meters, which is being proposed by planning staff. So again, just to clarify, our request is to have 6 meters, and I said across the board for both for the entire dwelling.
I got to ask Holly. Holly, do we have to make a change now to because I read that there was that 7 meter requirement in front of the garage? Or are we all right just the way it is now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just taking a look at what was requested in planning's conditions. Certainly, you have the option to grant the minor variance as originally requested. I think also he was asking for the maximum lot coverage of, for example, 55%, where Curtis's report has indicated that planning staff is recommending only a 50% approval. That would be to the discretion of the committee.
Okay, then I think let's get the parameters out there, because when we bring the public in, how do we handle that? I would prefer to go with what Curtis has written, and that is the way we will deal with this. Is that okay?
Through you, Mr. Chair, staff has recommended that the maximum lot coverage, I'm just looking at the PowerPoint, perhaps Ms. Leach can bring up the last slide for file A25 and A26, where planning is requesting that the maximum lot coverage be approved at 50% and that the minimum front yard be approved at 6 meters to dwelling face and 7.7 meters to the garage. And if I'm understanding the agents correctly, they are asking that you would grant the applications based on their original submissions, which would be the 55% lot coverage and the 6 meters minimum front yard. That would be to the decision of the Committee of Adjustment to make.
Okay, so then I can I prefer to what is written. The other see, what was the other? There was another question. Bernie, do you have any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Chair, I would like to know, what is the square footage of this bungalow to be built?
I don't know if they've decided that. Patrick, have you got any, or you're not in a position to discuss what your applicant has in mind?
I think perhaps Matt can assist me with this. I don't want to give you the wrong number. That's why I'm looking to the report. I thought that it indicated what the square footage was. But go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Through you, Chair. The planned bungalow, which our client tentatively has slated for this lot, is approximately 2,500 square feet. The reason why coverage is requested in addition to that is because there is a garage, which also plays into the footprint of that building. And that's why the requested variance is for larger than the percentage of the lot, which 2,500 square feet would occupy.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm rather concerned that you're asking for 5 minor variances on each lot. I think we're pushing the envelope, where in fact, you could build a very nice home on that lot, give us a bit more space on each side and front.
Bernie,
it's too close.
look at it this way. What we're giving the builder, he might have a client says, I only want a house of 1,600 square feet. Okay. Or he's going to have a client wants 2,000 square feet. All we're telling him is that maximum you can do is 2,500 square feet. Okay.
Okay.
So from that aspect, what he's asking is for flexibility when he's dealing with clients. I mean,
okay.
Quite honestly, if you look at some of the subdivisions, people are asking for 1,600 or 2,000 square foot. Then the neighbors might be happy that they're going to see maybe a 2,000 square foot home. Nobody asked that the size of the house be stipulated in part of the conditions. I mean, that hasn't been brought up, and I don't want to get into that. But anyhow, all we're saying is that if they want to build a decent house, and I think Curtis is it, you got to go with the 50% and with the setbacks. Otherwise, you can't get a decent house that, how shall we say, in part works with the rest of the neighborhood. Am I wrong there, Curtis?
Through the chair. No, not entirely. I just want to clarify though that like knowing the square footage of the house is hard to determine. I mean, only the applicants might have an inkling of what that would be, but from the municipality's perspective, the zoning does not prescribe a maximum floor area of the house. The zoning, in this case, prescribes a maximum lot coverage, and lot coverage is basically regulating like how much coverage of roof you can have given the lot area. So given the lot area that's proposed, 533 square meters at the applicant requested 55% coverage, recognizing that, that would be about just over 3,100 square feet. Obviously you'd have to deduct space for the garage and then the front and back porches. So the planning department thought that was basically pushing it. So given the policy, and I mean, I'm not going to go into the analysis in the report, but we were recommending that be limited to 50% maximum. The front yard setback, basically the applicants are just, Mr. Maloney is just asking that you approve it as it was requested, basically with a 6 meter front yard, just flat. Our only modified condition of approval on that one was that it was specified that it was to the dwelling face only. And that was in an effort to basically avoid, well, in planning, we call them snout houses where the garages come forward. It's not generally seen as desirable from an urban design perspective or streetscaping perspective. That's basically where we're at. So that was how our recommended recommendation for approval was modified.
Okay, fine.
Through the chair. So upon reading the Pelham official plan, the 23.32 objectives to respect the character of existing development, ensure that all applications for development are physically compatible with the character of the surrounding neighborhoods, to maintain and enhance the character and stability of existing and well-established residential neighborhoods by ensuring that the development is compatible with the scale and density of the existing development. So intensification, Schedule A1, better introduce the creation of a new freehold or vacant condominium infill lots through the consent process for ground-orientated detached dwellings may be permitted providing the proposed lot and unit type is similar to the compatible with the established character of the street or neighborhood where it is proposed. The zoning bylaw shall establish minimum lot area and frontages and minimum and maximum densities, which are considered appropriate within this urban living designation. And I'm certain that's primarily why we've got so many letters coming from the neighborhood, and they're seeing what the developer wants to do.
But I mean, Bernie, Curtis has already just told you how he's established what have. That's what we're dealing with. He's also told us that they went with this so that a nicer home could be built on there. Okay. What they're giving the builder the ability to put a nice house on those lots. Okay. If they didn't, you're going to have a 1,200 square foot home on those lots. You understand what I'm saying? So there's nice homes there. So the planning department has made sure that you could put a nice house on there, unless I'm wrong. But Curtis, would you agree with that?
But our official plan, number 3, in planning staff's opinion, the proposed increased lot coverage of 55% is not adequately justified, nor is it compellingly warranted according to the consideration of policy
Bernie just explained that why he went to 50, and that Curtis just explained that.
Okay.
So that's what we're basing it on what he's written. Okay.
Yes, I wrote my notes prior to that change.
I had that clarified. So, Mr. Maloney, we're looking at what Mr. Thompson has written, if you understand.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to try to, perhaps I was not clear when I was trying to explain it. The applicant has requested 55% lot coverage. Mr. Thompson and our planning department is requesting that the maximum lot coverage be approved at only 50%. As I also indicated, the minimum front yard has been requested by the applicant for 6 meters, whereas the planning department has made the recommendation to approve for 6 meters to the dwelling and 7.7 meters to the garage. So Mr. Law is correct that our planning department is requesting a 50% lot coverage. Albeit that the applicant is here today requesting that the committee approve the minor variances as submitted, and Mr. Thompson is requesting that the minor variances be slightly amended to be a little bit closer in alignment with our zoning bylaw, and that decision is with the Committee of Adjustment. So the Committee of Adjustment does get to determine whether or not it's 50% or 55%, or anywhere in between there, potentially. I hope that perhaps helps Mr. Law understand the situation.
Okay. Sandra, we haven't heard from you. What is your opinion on this?
Through the chair, I thank Curtis for his planning analysis again, and Mr. Kernahan for his analysis. I just have a clarification regarding the lot coverage at 50%. I agree with that. However, the maybe I misunderstood this, or maybe I'm still not understanding. The minimum front yard of 6 meters is to the dwelling, and the 7.7 is requested to the garage. That means the garage will be recessed?
Correct. That's the way I understand it. Is that correct, Mr. Thompson?
Through the chair, yes. The 7.7, I mean, we didn't really need to write it we just wrote it just to help clarify, but apparently it's making more confusion. The 7.7 meter front yard setback is the default front yard setback right now. So if you guys, the Committee of Adjustment does not approve the 6 meters or the front yard setback at all, but the lots are still created, then the front yard setback would automatically still be 7.7 meters. So in an effort, and as the applicants have described, and it's in the staff report as well, in an effort to help have the proposed dwelling fit into the neighborhood better, they've applied to reduce it to 6 meters. And that's in part because the neighboring property to the north is a corner lot, and that the street line setback for that wall of the house is actually 5 meters in the R1 zone because it's an exterior side yard setback. So by the applicant's request for applying to reduce the front yard setback, they're actually helping to keep that alignment along the street more consistent. And also just to clarify that's about it.
So then Can I say then that what we're looking at, 50% coverage and a 6-foot setback? Is
6
that
meters.
6 meter? I'm 6 meter setback then, not the 7. And
That would.
Curtis,
that would
you don't
require
have
to be
any
a
problem
motion.
with that? Yes? Go ahead, Nancy.
Mr. Chair, that would have to be through your motion to
Okay.
reduce it because you're dealing with the application the way it was submitted. If you're going to approve something that is less than what is requested, then you do have to include that in your motion.
No. Is that the three of us have to go through it, or does Mr. Thompson have to approve it?
So the committee does have the jurisdictional authority to approve something that is closer to what the zoning bylaw requires. So the zoning bylaw for lot coverage, they have applied for 55. The committee can approve 50, but you need to put that in your motion that you will only approve up to 50% if that's what the committee's desire is.
Fine. Bernie, have you, do you want to put a motion as to what we should be looking at?
Has anyone raised a hand?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have members of the public that do wish to comment on the minor variance portion of the meeting. I think that I see Michael and, Michael and Steve have used the raise the hand icons, indicating that they would like to speak to the committee. So if you'd like, Mr. Chair, we can bring them in.
Let me put it this way, before we start that, Bernie, have you, or Sandra, have you any more questions from the applicants? Sandra?
I just have a question to the applicants. If the committee chooses to grant a minor variance with the reduced lot coverage to 50%, is that something that the applicant would agree to and be willing to work with the design plans for the new homes?
See,
Patrick,
would you be the one to answer that?
Sure, I will. In relation to the, I mean, I'm going to preface my comments to say that the optimal design would be as applied for. With respect to the lot coverage, I think that is more easily accommodated than the reduction in the garage, because that kind of just, it reduces that area by 1.7 meters times whatever the width of that area would be. So that is a little more complicated, but at the end of the day, Ms. Marsh, it's ultimately your decision, and we don't have to agree to it or not, if I can just put it that way.
Bernie and Sandra, I'd like to suggest that we listen to, open up the public portion, listen to what we have to say before we make any comments on the lot coverage or the front yard setback, and see what the public has to say. Would you agree with that?
Yes, John, I agree with that.
What about you, Sandra?
Through the chair, I agree as well.
Okay, then, thank you.
Through you, Ms.
I need a 2-minute break, but in the meantime, could you bring our first guest in, please?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, we will bring in Anne and Michael. Anne, just give us one moment. We'll bring them into the meeting.
I'll be right back.
Perfect. You should be receiving a request to unmute. Wonderful. If you could just allow the chair the quick 2-minute recess and withhold your comments until the chair's returned.
Thank you, Holly. Different computers. What happened? I didn't get that exit of this one.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have our first members of the public in the meeting for you.
Okay, I would ask that you proceed. There's certain issues that have already been addressed. And you've seen that we're discussing the lot coverage and the frontage and that, so that hasn't been completely agreed to yet. So I give you the floor so you understand that we want to hear your input, please.
Thank you, Chair Clausen, and we appreciate this opportunity. We're concerned, obviously, about the fact that it keeps being mentioned that these are antiquated bylaws and that there are properties elsewhere in Ontario which are smaller than this. But again, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that they are the bylaws that exist in our town of Pelham. And regardless of the fact that they were established in 1987, there was a due process done in establishing those bylaws. And the mere fact that other areas of town and other areas of our province have smaller lot sizes, I think should not be a guiding principle for the determination of the lot size and coverage.
Well,
the lot size has, yes, disappointing.
Okay, so let's not discuss the lot size.
We'll work on the percent coverage of the lot. My concern is that we are trying to do a minor variance, and I say the word minor. I had assumed that would be about a 10% change, perhaps, as being minor. You're looking at variances to the laws that are established in our town of between 24%, and if you now accept the town's recommendation to go to a 50% coverage, which is certainly far better than what was requested, you're still looking at a 67% change to a bylaw that's impacted. So I wouldn't describe that as being a minor variance. I certainly can say that establishing it at a 50% is far preferable to, I think there was a request of 55% coverage. I think it's still a substantive home. And I wonder if consideration or some kind of condition can be added that says that the side properties can be changed so that there's a little bit more space in between the properties, especially against part 1 against number 2 step floor, where it would be a very tight lineup there. But I think all of the properties around here have a much wider space in between the houses. And so I would recommend that the interior side yard, which you're trying to change by 17%, isn't changed to such a significant degree.
Okay. And with what you have you looked at it from the point that would you like to have a nice sized home there, say around 2,500 square feet, as opposed to have a 1,300 or 1,400 square foot home?
I think,
do you understand?
Yes, absolutely. I think Mr. Thompson made it quite clear that there's nothing in this bylaw that can identify the square footage of the home. It's the percent coverage of the home. And I believe if the town has indicated that's the percent lot maximum lot coverage, and I think it's inappropriate to ask whether or not the developer can deal with a change in the lot coverage. If the Committee of Adjustment feels that it's appropriate to change the lot coverage, that's their decision. The developer would then have to adjust to it accordingly.
Okay, and I'd like you to know that we've heard your lot coverage and what you have, and we will be discussing that after the public portion before we vote. Okay, so
thank you for your time. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we had one more member of the public use the raise their hand. Oh, sorry, we have two more members. The one that had their hand up the last time is Steve. We'll bring him back into the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for planning. What is the definition of a major variance in planning terms?
Well, Curtis, you have the floor.
Through the chair. Well, that's $1 million question because there is not really one. It's, I mean, Committee of Adjustments across the province have to make tough decisions like this all the time, and minor variance applications are well known in the development world, and it's never really an easy answer because local context is different, planning policies are different at a local and a regional level. And then obviously the development proposal is different too. Not all developments are proposed equally. Like there isn't really an answer to be honest.
So basically what you're saying is
what I'd like to
variances.
What I'd like to ask Curtis, well, Curtis, in life, we can't predict all things happening. I think I know where he's going there with this minor, but I think there was a provision put in the Planning Act that not all development can work as we outline in that, and sometimes people need relief for something to make things going. And that's why we have the minor variance process. Is that correct? And the minor variance is the wording means that to allow someone to be able to do something that that'll either enhance or for whatever reason, which otherwise couldn't be done based on the rules and regulations. Is that correct?
To the chair in a roundabout way, yeah. So they didn't. Like they could also apply to rectify the zoning items through a rezoning application, which is a different part of the Planning Act. But zoning bylaws are never stagnant. They're an evolving document, just like communities are an evolving organism. They're always changing. So it's a moving target to always have zoning bylaws that are calibrated in the right way for each property and each geography.
Okay, go ahead then, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Curtis. My only point is, obviously, minor's a misnomer. It should just be a variance application, because to the average citizen like myself, when you're talking 55%, from 30% to 55%, that represents an 83% increase. That's far from minor. And even going from 30% to 50% is a 66 2/3% increase, not minor. And I don't see how that respects the character of the existing neighborhood. And you can talk about the fact that it's a mature neighborhood and go back to 1987, but that's what we are. You want to create a new development with these new conditions, blow your brains out, but that's not what we live in today. And I think it's disrespectful of the existing property owners in this area. The other couple of points that I just want to make, and these are comments, and with all due respect, hearing some of the justifications for the town's planning department approving these variances, to me, it sounded like a bunch of boilerplate motherhood statements that don't respect the feelings of the existing neighbors. And I just have the feeling that it really doesn't matter what we say or feel. The town's going to end up doing what they want. And if the town turns it down, it'll go up to the province and they'll approve it. And we're just getting sucker punched. So I'm very frustrated by this whole process. And those are just my personal comments. This is also, in my mind, this is the staged approach. So the first motion that was approved was to approve the severance of these smaller lots. Now that that's done, now we got to deal with severances because, we have to do the variances in order to make the houses look appropriate for the area. And the same thing will happen with part 3 comes up. So bottom line is I'm disgusted with what's going on here because I don't know what happened in the last meeting. And this is my comment. If you want to throw me out of the meeting when I say this, you go right ahead. But I think we got sucker punched because we had 2 members of the committee that spoke in favor of the neighbors, and then you went and voted for it. So I don't know what happened. Maybe you guys are smoking something that we don't, but
no, I resent the way you're talking. I won't allow that anymore. I'm cutting it off. Okay, let's bring in the next person.
Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will put the resident back into the waiting room where he can still observe and see the conversation going on, and we'll bring in our next member of the public who has used the raise the hand icon, and I believe it's Peter Scott. Thank you.
Okay, Peter.
Hello again.
Hello again. Now, we've made a number of discussions. Let's just stick to the issues. There's a number of minor variances that have been asked for. I would ask that you just stick your comments and stick to that. Okay. And I don't want to hear any comments about character or the system.
No, I'll behave. I'll be a good boy. Don't worry about it. Okay, so, Mr. Chair, I do have a point of order before I pass my comments on. In the last application, both Bernie Law and yourself spoke against the last motion, yet you voted for it. I just wanted clarification that you understood what you did.
Well, I have no problem justifying what I did. If you remember, I said I think it was a little premature, but I also have to respect the rules and regulations. I can't put my own personal feelings in. It was said right from the start that part 3 was not for us to bring that in as part of our decision. And when I said to you that, it's premature, I shouldn't vote on it, really, I had no right to say that in that context because I was bringing in part 3. So when I look at the way the system is and how we are supposed to deal with it, I had to vote for the proposal.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted it recorded in the minutes that you had spoke against it, but you voted for it. So I just wanted that to be clear, and I was a little bit confused by it. That's the reason I asked. Okay, so basically, initially I'd intended to speak in opposition to the relief. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not really sure if it would make a difference or not. So I basically have a question or a comment for Patrick Maloney, the lawyer. If you can confirm that a bungalow will be built, I'd rather see it be longer than higher. And I'd like confirmation that the conditions discussed previously will be met. Firstly, that a 1.5 meter wood fence would be installed. The timing of the installation of the fence is important. When the trees are removed, and it will be done at the applicant's cost. I would request that some cedar trees or mutually agreeable trees will be planted in the northeast corner. That would be the very front of their property. Could be on the north or the south side of the fence, and that would include my property or their property, wherever we can put it in to create more privacy. That wouldn't be a large expense. The applicant will provide north-facing elevation plans that indicate the number and location of windows as a condition of approval. I think that we can come to terms on that, but I would like to see that north-facing elevation plan with the windows. And I would also like to confirm that all the windows in the north-facing wall will be clear story, as discussed. And these should all be written conditions, not suggestions or requests. So that's my question for Patrick Maloney.
Well, I'll interject in there first before. If you read the conditions for the consent and what these conditions were all written in, and we've had that the building department, the building inspector, and the bylaw enforcer and the arborist, these people have all been given the task of making sure what you just talked will be done. Okay, Mr. Maloney.
Not all the points I just made.
Okay, I'll let Mr. Maloney.
Thank you.
Deal with that then. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Scott, I'm going to try to answer every single question you asked in the one question. In fairness, some of the issues you asked about were conditions that were attached to the severance. So, and those conditions have to be satisfied within 1 year before we're able to even create the lot. We have to satisfy those conditions. So, In terms of the timeline, the latest that can be done is, let's say a day before a year, but it has to be done sooner than that in order to get our certificate of consent, which allows us to then create that lot. So I can say the condition as it relates to the fence, the condition for the tree savings plan. And I can tell you that my client is watching and listening. And so I know you had some discussions with him about this before, and he's prepared to work with you on that. In terms of the condition relating to the minor variance, relating to the windows, this is a condition that would have to be met in order for the variances to be allowed or to be acted upon. So we have committed to that. That was even Mr. Scott, our suggestion to Mr. Thompson is that we include that condition, knowing that you might be concerned about that. So the condition will read that we have to do the clear story windows or something similar. Again, I rectified that with Mr. Thompson. There may be an opaque window in the washroom, but that's the only other thing. And we will have to provide those drawings to the Director of Planning to her satisfaction. In terms of the type of house, I can tell you, as I said earlier, our client is committed to building a bungalow. He has a plan that he has used on another property, and it works in this location. So, subject to just fitting within the apply for variances. That's his absolute intention, is to build a bungalow. And I hope I answered all of the things you were asking about.
Mr. Scott, you heard what he said?
Yes, I heard, and I just wanted to have clarification for all those points. And also just wanted to say I was disappointed that Antonio's watching but not participating in the meeting. It would have been good to have had him here so that we could talk to him in person. But I guess I'll just have to catch up with him in the back lot. So thank you.
That's what Matt and I are here for. Thank you.
So, I mean, that's here nor there, but okay. So, and if you do have any problem, Mr. Scott, you just call the town, because the town are the ones that are going to make sure that Antonio Holmes performs to what was agreed to. So you do have protection, and your rights will be looked after. Okay, I think the town has been pretty clear on that. That's all I have to say. Any more questions? Okay, then we're finished then.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, we will just put the resident back into the waiting room, and we will just check to see if anybody else has used the raise their hand icons. I don't see anybody using the raise the hand icons. I will check the Pelham, the clerks at pelham.ca email address, just to see if we received any emails. It is now 7:40 p.m. and we have not received any emails, and therefore, if you wish, you could close the public portion of the meeting.
I will close the public portion, and we will now get on with the decision making. And I would ask one of you, Bernie, if you want to put out a proposal that we can vote on as to site coverage and the front setback, so we can get that ironed out. We'll vote on that so we know what we're voting on. Please proceed, Bernie.
Yes, it's interesting that we can see that we're trying to make some amendments to make this happen, but my original comments were that 533 square meters is very small for a lot in this area. And asking for 5 minor variances, these are major variances, John. I'm not happy with what I'm reading here. So you're asking me, because we've changed a little bit. We added a foot in the driveway. You know what? 533 square meters for a lot in this area isn't what we need. The neighborhood has spoke loud.
Well, Bernie, I don't think it's for us to say that. What we have to do is we have the paper in front of us, what Curtis has written, whatever else, and it's for us to deal with what has been written. Whether we like it or not, right at this point, isn't relevant. What's relevant is to deal with the issue at hand. The issue at hand is, do we go 50 or 55%? Do we go 6 across the board, or do we include that 7.7? That's what we got to clarify. and then we can get on to the voting. And that's all we got to deal with right now. And if you don't want,
Chair, I am grateful for that change. Yes.
Okay. So you want to go with 50 and 6 across the board? And then I'll ask Sandra if she would second that, and then we'll vote on that. And then at least then we know what we're voting on with regards to the minor variance. Is that okay? So,
Mr. Chair, Mr. Thompson had his hand raised.
Pardon?
Mr. Thompson had his hand raised.
Oh, I didn't see that. Sorry. Go ahead, Curtis.
Through the chair, just to clarify, you'll be rendering a decision on minimum lot area. These are all independent. Minimum lot area, minimum lot frontage, maximum lot coverage, minimum front yard setback, and minimum interior side yard setback. It's not just the lot coverage and front yard setback
I know
which
that
dominated the conversation. And just to also clarify, the lot area and the lot frontage are required, whether it be dealt with tonight as part of your decision, which you're about to make, to affect the severances. If you fail to approve those two, the applicant would have to deal with it some other way, whether that be through an amended application or through a zoning application or through an LPAT appeal. But those two are intricately connected to the severance application, whereas the rest of them aren't. But they do have to all be decided tonight.
Okay.
So I think the chair is just looking to ensure that there's a separate motion for each variance. We will make sure as staff that none of the variances are left off of the decision making. And I think he's calling for a motion with regard to the maximum lot coverage, which was requested at 55, and he's looking for a motion on what to approve on the lot coverage right now.
Lot coverage and the lot frontage.
We'll do it one at a time, Mr. Chair, because you have to vote on each one separately anyways under...
No, I can't make the proposal. I would propose that we
so
go with...
you would call for a motion from the floor.
Yeah, I would want a motion from the floor for lot coverage. Do I have a motion? Go ahead, Bernie.
Yes, I will prepare a motion that the lot coverage be 50%.
Okay, a seconder? All in favor? 50% is approved for both applications. Now, I would like to entertain a motion for the front yard setback. Do I have a motion?
Yes, I will also make a motion that the front yard setback be changed to, no, I got it, to 6 meters from 7.7 is required. So what was our final discussion? It was to be left at?
Was discussed as 6 meters.
6 meters, yes.
Okay, seconder? All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Now, as regard to the other minor variances, do I have a motion on the floor that we approve them as written? There's 3 of them, I think, right? Yeah, the 3 written for side yard, backyard.
Interior frontage.
Yeah, interior
lot frontage and lot area.
No, we've got lot area. No, lot coverage. Okay.
So if you call for a motion for the lot area.
Okay, lot area as written. Could I have a motion for that? Go ahead, Bernie. And Sandra, second? Okay, all in favor? Okay, then the next one is?
Minimum lot frontage.
Minimum lot frontage.
We did that.
Yeah, we did that.
We did not do frontage yet.
No? What's the 6 feet then? 6 meters.
That's setback.
Setback, yeah.
This is for section 13.2B, minimum lot frontage to permit the frontage of 15.2 meters, whereas the bylaw requires 19.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Bernie. Okay. Second
So
by
motion by Member Marsh.
All in favor? Okay, so how many we got left?
The final one to consider is section 13.2E, minimum interior side yard, to approve an interior side yard of 1.5, whereas the bylaw requires 1.8.
Okay. Okay, Bernie, you're tabling that. Sandra,
And are you tabling it as presented?
Yes.
Presented. All in favor? Vote.
Yes.
Okay. So we've approved all of them. Now.
So just for clarity, all of the variances have then been approved, except you made the amendments down to 50% lot coverage and the minimum front yard setback of 6 meters instead of what was applied. And each motion was duly moved, seconded, and voted.
Okay.
So then to Ms. Wilford to see if there is any additional business on the agenda.
Just say thank you for your time this evening.
Three.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Yeah, Holly, do we have any more business?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no minutes on the agenda for approval, so I would be looking for a motion for adjournment.
Oh, Sandra, seconded by Bernie. All in favor? Okay, thank you. And thank you for the town staff. And Nancy, thanks for helping me out. It was a little bit of a learning curve.